As a storyteller, I've always been fascinated with the idea of recreating this notion of choices in a fiction. My dream was to put the audience in the shoes of the main protagonists, let them make their own decisions, and by doing so, let them tell their own stories.
Fahrenheit: The Indigo Prophecy is an interactive experience made by Quantic Dream, but the main driving force behind this title and their future projects is a man called David Cage, who is the French version of Hideo Kojima with the self-awareness tossed off the Eiffel Tower. Toasty! We start this story with a classic Hollywood setup, in a shitter at a New York diner. Well, if you pick the tutorial, you start with the Cage Meister telling you how the camera controls work. Thanks mate, I never knew that the right analog stick does that. Anyway, we see a man minding his own business draining the one-eyed snake, with another sat in a store carving some kind of symbol into his arm, like a man possessed. After some rejected Silent Hill cutscenes, this bloke stands up and walks towards the man.
So that gives you an idea of what my work is about as an interactive writer, where a linear writer needs to deal with time and space. As an interactive writer, I need to deal with time, space, and possibilities.
No shit.
The murderer and our main protagonist, Lucas Kane, finally comes to his senses and realises what he has done, and in a panic, disposes the body and the murder weapon before the cop that is sitting at the bar gets up and goes to the glory hole. Instead of a stiffy, he finds a stiff sitting on the toilet and raises the alarm. While this is happening, Kane makes a run for it, in a cool split-screen stylee. Shortly after this, we are introduced to the other protags in this film, Detective Kara and Tyler of the NYPD, who has been tasked to investigate this murder. And this plays out like a typical adventure game, where you ask multiple questions and gather evidence, without the moon logic gameplay that plagues this genre. That shit is safe for the storytelling, and oh boy, we will get to that. Overall, I think this intro is great. It hits you over the head with a stick of mystery, and it got me hyped. It's like watching an episode of The X-Files if it was directed by a mad Frenchman. We flip back to Lucas, who wakes up in his bed covered in his own blood. After curing his hangover with a chili chutney sandwich, Lucas and his brother meet up and have a yap for a bit, and then Kane sees a glimpse of the future of a boy falling into a frozen lake. So the big red machine jumps in to rescue him. However, the cop who discovered the body the night before spots him, but as he just saved the boy from turning into a popsicle, he lets him go.
Maybe he decided I was even. I had taken a life and given one back. Nothing really changed for me. I was still wanted for murder by the police. But when I left that park, I knew I could look myself in the mirror again without cringing.
That's not how it works, Lucas. And the game just goes along at this pace for the first few hours. The cops try to gather evidence, and Lucas goes to work and tries to pretend like nothing happened, until he gets chased by giant digital fleas? Not going to lie, this feels very Phantasmagoria 2. However, the gameplay of this interactive experience is not as abstract. The only question you need to answer is, do you like playing Simon? If you do, well, you get to play it in stereo. Yes, Fahrenheit is one long QuickTime event, where you input the Konami code to make shit happen. Actually, that is a lie, because the input you do on the controller rarely add up to what's going on, and while on the other hand it has the most boring QTEs ever. Now, mundane shit in a game can be used to ground the player in its world. The first example that comes to my mind is Shenmue, or the aforementioned classic adventure games, where you rifle through cupboards and drawers and find stuff. or get a part-time job to pay the bills. But you quickly find out the use of this inert content is because Indigo is padded like David Cage's cell. These sequences go on for so bloody long. And the scene that ties both of these problems together is the one where Lucas has to dodge items from his flat that are trying to kill him. Yes, this is a hallucination, and yes, it was funny at first, but 5 minutes of pressing buttons to dodge boxes is testing my fucking patience. After being tormented by termites, Lucas gets in contact with an old blind lady called Agatha, who is of course a psychic who dives into his mind to work out why shit is nutty. It turns out a mysterious man with a scary voice, a man that only Kane can see I might add, is the gentleman that possessed our hero to kill, while reciting Shakespeare, because we need more tropes thrown into this tire fire. To skip ahead, Carla and Taylor manage to work out that Kane is the murderer, so they move in on his house to arrest him, which is now filled with satanic imagery. Think the end of days with somehow less subtlety. And hey, do you remember The Matrix? You know, the one that revolutionized cinema? David Cage does. When Lucas becomes the One, this murder mystery game with a hint of the supernatural gets replaced with whatever movie David was watching while writing the script at the time. It's a tonal shift that comes out of nowhere and continues to baffle, to the point where it feels like 2 or 3 different stories were mashed together. You see, Kane's newfound powers were due to an alien artifact that he was exposed to as a child, and this possession and subsequent killing was the catalyst to unlocking this power. The artifact that Kane discovered, known as Chroma, has the power to pull whatever contrived bullshit David Cage wants at any given time, especially when he writes himself into a corner, which he does frequently. And to spoil the rest of this friggin' plot, the scary voiced man, who is making innocent people kill others in this ritualistic way, is because he's a Mayan oracle, who is trying to open the gates of the otherworld. To open the gates of Helheim, the Oracle needs to sacrifice a girl that is also the savior of humanity, so Lucas does a Kyle Reese to stop Mr. X from terminating her. But wait, it gets better. Out of nowhere, there is another faction trying to get the girl too. This new group is driven by an artificial intelligence, thing that wants to use her power to take over the world. And yes, it comes out of nowhere and adds nothing to the story apart from another thing that Kane has to run away from. Okay, let's break away from this madness and catch up with Tyler and Clara.
Let it crawl.
Yeah, maybe not. This is another problem. We have a main cast that is, for all intents and purposes, pretty fun to be around. Sadly, they don't have much to say. And Tyler is one big stereotype. He was a street kid who used to run with the local gangs, and now he's a cop. However, his apartment looks like a 70s porno set. And he even plays basketball. Also, that soundtrack. And I know Cage is trying to evoke the days of the cheesy cop dramas, but this comes off as racist. And there's even a bit where Ty goes to an antique bookshop and the owner is, well, just watch.
Unhappily, I am but a waterless well of ignorance. My tiny expertise extend wholly to books I sir here.
Okay, this character here is putting on this accent, but even his more palatable accent is just as racist.
Is it just me or did you lose your accent?
Oh yeah, that's for the customers. They love that wise old Japanese master stuff. I was born in Brooklyn, man. I never been no further than Long Island. I'm more American than you are, man.
It's like that bit in Life is Strange, another game that chums my chud, where the lead character Max chats to a preppy black kid, who for some reason has a 40-year-old white male actor playing him. Isn't there enough actors that you could pick to be more appropriate for this character? Or are the developers tone deaf? Oh, they are French too. Huh. Okay, I think we need to cool off. Let's talk about the music. The soundtrack is split between early 2000s rock, that sounds like the atypical Roadrunner Records style tosh, with a Nickelback album lodged between its arse cheeks, and a orchestral score composed by none other than Angelo Badalamenti. Some of you might have gasped at that revelation. If you don't know who this is, you may recognise this. To be honest, I did not believe it at first, but after checking out various places, yep, he made this soundtrack. And you can hear that emotional and dour mood that makes his work unique. It's nowhere near as iconic as his previous work, but it does hit the right notes at the right times. The presentation as a whole is okay, and to clarify, I am playing the remastered port on the PC. And to call it a remaster is stretching it. It still looks like an original Xbox game with a slightly sharper skin. And the only reason why you would play the remaster is because the sex scenes that were originally cut from the PS2 game have now been put back in for prosperity, so you have the pleasure of using the right analog stick to... you get the idea. Well, that's it people, we've hit the peak of interactive entertainment. 40 years of innovation means nothing in comparison to a bunch of polygons rubbing against each other. Sadly, I have to take away this award as Mr. Cage forgot to code in a button to start crying mid-thrust. The problem with the presentation is that you won't be able to digest it because your eyes will be focused on the middle of the screen, meaning all this frantic action, all this motion cap wizardry, which was performed by the greatest stuntman of all time, is being ignored, and on most occasions, it's distracting. After being chased by the cops, McCaffrey antivirus, and a melted 2850 action figure, Lucas and Clara forge an unlikely alliance, which goes against her character and turns someone that had an independent spirit into yet another drone. In the first half of the game, Clara is methodical and calculated. You get the feeling in a very short amount of time that she's been a beat cop for a long time, and she has a savvy demeanour, until this frozen tit comes out of nowhere and says he's been tormented by spirits and shit, and this speech alone is enough to drop all of her experience and just believe him. And just like any juvenile power fantasies, and I felt dirty just saying that, they bone after meeting up. Because why the fuck not? It's not like Lucas was spending most of his time trying to reconvene with his girlfriend. Yeah, she died. This whole affair started at the grave of Kane's former girlfriend, which completely invalidates Lucas and his ex getting back together early in the game, and renders another character to be completely pointless. Fuck me, was this story written by Drowning Pool? How many more bodies are gonna hit the floor? While I might be glossing over some of the smaller moments, which are just as baffling, the reason why I'm doing this is because everything moves at such a breakneck speed, with plot threads appearing out of nowhere and being instantly dropped. So it's hard to do a standard analysis of the plot, and there's some elements I don't want to spoil. So for the sake of brevity, let's double dash to the finale. What there is of it. Because the ending is just a blowout of Lucas killing everyone with relative ease, and saving the world by placing that girl on a stone tablet. And yes, it's just as unsatisfying as the sentence explaining this fucking scene, with a kicker at the end, where Kane explains the world went back to normal, and Clara is pregnant with a supposed new saviour of mankind.
The cold went away just like it had come, in silence, as if the indigo child had turned the hourglass by delivering her message. Everything was just as it was before. I guess that means the lesser evil. The Oracle and the Orange Clan went back to their places of power in the secret government of the world, and the Purple Clan went back to haunting us on the net. I should be happy, I guess. I've been living with Carla for 3 months. She's the best thing that's happened to me in a long time. Yesterday, she told me that she's pregnant. Must have been that night in Bogart's underground base. That means that our child was radiated by the chrome at Wishida, just like I was in my mother's womb. I don't know what's going to happen now. I'm the one and only keeper of the greatest secret in the universe. What should I do with all that power? Forget it? Put it in the service of humanity? I've never dreamt about being a god. I just want to live my life like anybody else.
Oh my God! Shut the fuck up!
Okay, hang on. What happened with the murder charge against Kane? Was it dropped? Is Clara now aiding a fugitive? Did Tyler dump his bunny boiler girlfriend? Did I leave this plot point out for being completely pointless? Who knows? And how this game was written, I don't think anyone fucking cared. which is a shame because I like Clara and Tyler's relationship. They have a great chemistry, and in most places made me laugh. Lucas, on the other hand, is bland. In fact, he breaks the 3 general rules of effective character design. Number 1, a lack of a decent backstory. All you know is that Kane is some poor schmo who gets picked at random to do this deed that is beyond his control, and then all of a sudden he's some kind of badass with a secret alien power that turns him into a kung fu superhero. Nothing is earned in the struggle, and his power just gets tossed into his lap because he is the main character. Join this with no other goals apart from finding out who did this to him, which gets disregarded halfway through, and of course, and most importantly, he has to bang the opposite sex. Because David Cage wants his OC to be the sexiest man alive. Don't steal. Numero dos. Lucas Kane lacks any moments of vulnerability or weakness. It's like the time when Zack Snyder tried to make Superman flawed in Man of Steel, and how dumb and redundant those following scenes were. What's the point in this? You know Soup's gonna bust out of the handcuffs, and at any moment he could fly the fuck away. And watching this scene back for this review, it's like the writers don't get the whole concept of a person being invincible, and that is they cannot be relatable. You cannot contain them, you cannot pacify them, and no amount of Linkin Park can ground them. And while playing or watching an invincible character is fun in short bursts, playing a game that goes on and on with more impossible shit being thrown at you, it makes me care less for the trivial shit that Lucas has to deal with. You could also chalk this down to the phenomenon known as plot armor, a trope that is very familiar to any anime fans out there, where the protagonist will go into a higher power state to obliterate their foe, and this power normally comes out of nowhere. It's kind of like a Deus Ex Machina but way more stylish, and Lucas breaks the 3rd and final rule of character development. If you are not writing about a character at their most interesting time, then why are you writing about them? Yes, Lucas is being pushed into one over the top set piece after another, but as the player we are never given any time or context to let this sink in, making all this action to be consumed at a surface level. And while most heroes in gaming and action films and so on are skin deep, spending quality time with an avatar that you control can be a powerful tool to bind the character to the player. And I can't believe I'm making this comparison, but take Ethan from Heavy Rain. While he is the relatable everyman archetype, you can buy into his character through experiencing mundane tasks, such as hugging your wife, triggering my Uncanny Valley, and the scene where he sits down to do some drawing, which pays off later after the loss of his son, and he is so depressed he can't bring himself to put pencil to paper. This hit me harder than everything that goes on in Fahrenheit, and granted, Heavy Rain is as subtle as a Black & Decker to the genitals. When you compare the character building between Fahrenheit and Heavy Rain, it's night and day. While these elements are not necessary for a good story or game, I mean, one of my favourites is God Hand, so I can't really get uppity over this shit. However, David Cage's pretensions towards Indigo being more than just a video game fall completely flat. And while it's a dirty topic to talk about, and I have cringed over this in the past, the truth is, games can be cinematic and keep what makes them unique. Ever since the dawn of the 3D era with the PlayStation and the 5th generation of consoles in general, developers have taken elements of cinema or anime and folded them into meaningful gameplay. For instance, take Devil May Cry as an example. The cutscenes are stuffed full of over-the-top animations that never gets in the way of the gameplay loop of intrinsic-based skill and extrinsic rewards, with these lines being blurred further with the progression of technology. And while I've railed on Fahrenheit for its story and its characters not being very good, there might be another reason why this title, especially in the back half, is such a mess. You see, the original plan was to make this game episodic, like what Telltale Games would do just a few years later. The original idea for Fahrenheit was going to be an epic 12-part series, with a big team of writers grinding it out to make it this insane epic. Sadly, due to the people above David Cage having good business sense and overrunning production costs, the game was cut down to meet a deadline, which, if you frame it in this sort of regard, makes a lot more sense. Now, the burning question is, would a 12-episode storyline be any better? Would having more time to tell this said story and allowing the concepts to breathe be a benefit? Probably not. Now, would I want to see this mess? Yes. To wrap up, while this game is pretentious and created by a fucking madman, I have to give this game a little bit of respect because it was one of the first cinematic experience games out there. It was a pioneer, even with its flaws and questionable content. And I'm not ashamed to admit this, but I had a blast playing this tripe. And what I found riveting was just the randomness of it all, with scenes blatantly lifted from other films and dropped in here because the writer thought it was cool. And secondly, Indigo Prophecy was a title made at the right place at the right time, where batshit games was the order of the day. Indigo also hits that cringe curve that you find in films like The Room, where you can tell that it was made with passion but lacked any kind of competence to make these pretty decent ideas make any sense. My biggest criticism with this game is that Cage is trying so hard to have this thing judged as a film. When you look at it as a piece of cinema, it just doesn't hold together. But as a video game, it's a brainless slice of interactive entertainment. And I was indeed entertained. So in a weird way, he accomplished his goal. What I find attractive is the sheer spectacle and the jaw-dropping stupidity, and it kept me hooked. I have a soft spot for this try-hard edgy schlockfest, and it was fun while it lasted, and, as we're coming to the end of this video, was a very cathartic project to create. And with the 15th anniversary edition coming out on PS4 this month, I personally wanted to see what all the fuss was about, because this game got rave reviews when it came out. Everyone was banging on about it. But when I saw clips of it myself, I just ended up scratching my head thinking, who the fuck likes this shit? So I was feeling down a few weeks ago and sat down and gave it a play. And I played it all in one sitting. 8 hours of this stuff, and it was one of the best experiences I've had in quite some time playing the game. And while I think personally it'll be a one and done for me, granted I played it another 2 times to get through this fucking review, I respect this game. I think it's great. It's got a Resident Evil 6 vibe to it. It shouldn't work, it should fail, but somehow it works. I don't know how, and I don't know why. Fahrenheit is wildly entertaining. And lastly, I think it's safe to say that David Cage is the Neil Breen of video games. Okay. When I thought about the concept of covering Quantic Dream's games, I only had 2 things in mind. Explore the meme that is the creator of these games, and see if his titles are really that bad. And 2, I like to play games that try to stand out from the background and do something unique, or at least try to. This curiosity has always fueled my choices in which game I want to play and cover for this channel. And while it can fall flat on its face quite a few times, it is never boring. Well, for me anyway. And to let you in on my process, my brain works on a simple algorithm, that the worst games in my eyes are the ones that are boring, or do nothing to push the proverbial boat out. Ah shit, I'm stalling. Okay, Heavy Rain is a very, very bad game, and while it's a testament to everything wrong with David Cage and his approach to storytelling, it's a fascinating mess that needs to be pulled apart and examined. And now we have that all established, welcome to part 2 of the David Cage-a-thon.
All around me are familiar faces, worn out.
We start this sordid tale in the silk boxer shorts of Ethan Mars, a doting family man and architect, waking up in his lavish home in whatever town USA. After a shit, shave and shower, he bums around the house trying to find the motivation to do some drawing, in a sequence that is more relatable than I want to admit. This silence is quickly broken when Ethan's wife, who looks like she was rendered on a Sega Saturn, comes home from shopping with his sons, Jason and Sean, who also look like they've been rendered on graphics APIs from the early 2000s. After kicking Jason's ass in a sword fight and getting some dinner plates from the front room cupboard, I wonder if David Cage knows how dining rooms work. Actually, forget that shit, because Ethan discovers that Sean's pet bird has bitten the dust. And I bet you're wondering, does this mean anything? Will this bird play a major factor in the story?
Nope.
The following day, the Mars family hit the mall to buy some more stuff because they haven't got enough fucking decadence already. And Ethan and Jason decide to bum around and spend some quality time together, until Jason finds a creepy looking clown selling balloons and goads his dad to get him one. A red balloon, I might add. I guess they all float down here. And this is where the first cracks of stupidity make themselves known, because as soon as Jason receives this gift, his character loses most of his IQ points and just wanders off on his own, leaving Ethan to, yes, press X to repeatedly scream his son's name like a glitched text-to-speech program. And I don't know about you, but if you are working an orchestra's tits off to build the tension, making the player scream "Jason!" every 15 nanoseconds somewhat undercuts this mood. I will say that the memes were pretty good though. Anyway, Ethan finds his dumbass son across the road from the mall, and after shouting at him again using the holy button prompt, Jason decides to run across the road without looking at the car that's in his direct path. So in an act of daddy heroism, Ethan tries to dive towards his son to save him. And then 2 years have passed and everything is sad and depressing and whoa. Wait for a second, Space Cowboy. What just happened? Let's roll it back and take a look at that footage again. Okay, so Ethan grabs his boy and turns him away from the car. At the same time, the driver was already braking hard. And while you don't see the impact, the worst case scenario here is that Ethan should be more hurt than his son. Maybe some bruising, cuts, perhaps some broken bones, brain damage? But dead? Nah mate, I ain't buying it. Now, if Jason went under the wheels, then maybe he's dead, but I'm overthinking this load of mierda. The real reason why Jason has to die is that David Cage needs a plot device, goddammit, no matter how implausible. A theme that will show its head again very shortly. Right, so like I said before, 2 years have passed and Ethan and his wife have split up over the tragedy, and now he's living in a dingy house with his remaining son, Sean, who are both suffering from the grief of losing Jason. At least there isn't that meter gauging their mental state like in Fahrenheit. Alright, I didn't bring this up in the review, but I think you realise how dumb this mechanic is. While I respect that Cage is trying to be more realistic in his approach, such as this little part here where Ethan breaks down, which did hit me on a micro emo level, the reason why this moment fails to capture the mood is because how Jason passed away and how contrived it was. Plus the voice acting that is supposed to portray this sadness, especially from Sean, doesn't fit the tone.
Come on, Sean. It's time for bed.
Oh, but I never go to bed this early.
No, you're going to bed now. It won't do you any harm to go to bed early for once.
You're mean! You just want me to get out of the way so you can have some peace. I hate you!
Hello, fellow human. I am also a fellow human.
So after this long intro and this needless child death, what is the actual story of Heavy Rain? Well, to break it down, you play as 4 main characters who are on the hunt for the origami killer. The story actually begins when Ethan is on a day out with his remaining beautiful baby robot, who manages to vanish into thin air because David Cage needs another pissing plot device. No. The story is structured in a Tarantino-esque affair, where we jump from one protag to another, in what Cage quips as a non-linear story, not grasping the fact that his story is very linear. And while you can change the outcome in a very small way, to the detriment of the plot most of the time, the outcome is still the same. The other main characters, apart from Ethan, you get to control are Madison Paige. Her whole presence is so inconsequential to the entire plot, she could have been easily cut and no one would have noticed. Madison is just a waifu Cage fawns over for the whole pissing game, and her whole character arc could be boiled down to being assaulted multiple times. One of these being in a dream, which is totally necessary. And yes, boning the lead protagonist because DC's OC needs to get laid. Again. Also, in a creepy act of continuity, Madison is introduced in the same white tank top and panties that Clara was wearing in the last game. For fuck's sake, Cage, you're married, knock it off. Also, her first interaction with Ethan is really jarring. She just finds him at a random motel, all banged up, so, being the good person she is, she nurses him back to health under the guise that she's just being nice. Which is a very poor way of making these characters meet, because her actual motivation is to cozy up to him and find out if he is the origami killer, because she is a reporter. But we don't know her actual intentions or her vocation until later on, so her implementation in this story comes off as fucking clumsy. FBI agent Norman Jayden, who is Horatio Kane with all the charms sandblasted off, who also uses these CSI cyber shades, say that 3 times fast, to look for clues that mean nothing to the overall investigation. Also, I don't think our intrepid auteur knows that the FBI usually investigate white-collar crime. Yeah, they will investigate serial killers, but that's not their priority. I will say this, however, his gameplay is pretty cool, and it'd be a great little spin-off on its own. And lastly, we have Scott Shelby, a cop turned private eye who is investigating the murders for reasons. Also, he suffers from asthma, a point that is established very early on into the story, but it doesn't seem to hinder him beating the piss out of everyone that comes in his path, such as this frankly hilarious scene where a shopkeeper is being held at gunpoint. So of course, Shelby John Wicks him into a coma, but in a funny continuity botch, he forgets to disarm this bloke. Yep, he just proceeds to stand there yapping to the shopkeeper while an armed thug is 3 feet away. Did he die? Or did Shelby hit him so hard he disappeared off the face of the earth? And I thought Lucas Kane was wearing some thick plot armor. And the story just goes along at its own languid pace, where you jump from one avatar to another, and to be honest, most of this stuff is aggravating to witness from a gameplay perspective, which can only be described as restrictive and tedious. And most levels consist of a singular character bumming around doing nothing of note. For the sake of brevity, from now on I'll only comment on the bits that are relevant to the real story, rather than covering the Silent Hill downpour of bollocks, because there's a lot of shit in this game that goes nowhere and it's a giant waste of time, so let's get a move on. After Sean gets abducted in a scene that is more confusing than intriguing, Ethan is contacted by the origami killer and is given a series of challenges to uncover the location of his son, who is currently being held in a storm drain, and with this constant rain has only 3 days to survive, even though he would probably die of hypothermia or complications due to exhaustion. But you know David Cage, he doesn't care for subtleties or logic, tension, world and character building. I could go on. Such as this idea, which is a blatant copy of the gore porn shitefest Saw. Yeah, it's a 1-to-1 lift of the material, and while the traps that Ethan has to go through are very PG-13, the self-righteous antagonist punishing the person who is stuck in their deadly trials is still there. I would elaborate, but it would take effort, and David Cage can only muster a couple of keyboard shortcuts.
All around me are familiar faces, worn out.
To compress a ton of info into a bite-sized chunk, Heavy Rain was influenced by movies like Seven and Memento, both for being gritty thrillers and for their distinctive desaturated look. While Heavy Rain was made in the era where colours in gaming were banned, because the lizard people that run this fucking industry can only see 3 shades of grey, like E.L. James with colour blindness, I can forgive this choice in aesthetic because it does fit the mood, if you can ignore the permanent rainfall nearly every scene, which I know I am aware the title of the game and its significance with the wet stuff, but it can come off as a tad goofy at times. Just like the faces. Now, when the game came out over a decade ago, it was considered next gen at the time, and within this context, it looks like a typical first-party Sony affair, of pushing the graphics over everything else. The thing is, I'm playing this game on what is supposed to be the enhanced port on the PC, which is also available on the PS4, and the lower resolution imperfections that may have been missed in its native platform come into full view now. And that's a nice way of saying it looks like a fucking nightmare. Granted, what I'm about to get into isn't the game's fault, well, not fully anyway. You see, I suffer from the Uncanny Valley, and while it's not a flat-out phobia that is still being debated by experts, it was a phenomenon that was documented in the 1970s by a roboticist, Masahiro Mori. He concluded that a robot with some big eyes or vaguely human characteristics looked cute, and the people who saw these robots went away with a positive reaction. However, the further he made his robots to look more human, with realistic hair, eyes and skin, the test subjects would grow repulsed by the being that looked natural but acted unnaturally. Until the lines between man and machine were so close, the reaction of the test subjects went back to a neutral state, which is known as the Valley. But for the sake of getting to the cocking point, this uncomfortable feeling would hit me harder when the parallel between photorealism and artificiality smashed into each other, especially when games were try to be photorealistic in an age where this look was still slightly out of reach, especially in the time between the mid to late 2000s. And as you can see, David Cage and his team went full realism on Heavy Rain, and it makes my skin crawl. Now, on a surface level, I will give it to Quantic Dream for how much attention to detail they put into these faces of the main cast. Every wrinkle, hair and skin pigment looks great. My biggest complaint with the presentation, and where my brain lights up like a fucking Christmas tree, it's how uneven the cast looks in the rest of the game, especially the supporting actors. Let's go back to Ethan's wife for a second, and as you can see, there is a big difference between Ethan's face in comparison to... holy shit, she is so insignificant to the story I've forgotten her name. Whatever. What I'm trying to say is her face looks like a placeholder texture that wasn't fully fleshed out, pardon the pun. And when you see Ethan and Igor embrace, one of them looks kind of real, while the other makes my brain go. And its varying levels of production value makes this reaction even worse. Take another example, the loading screens. Like I said, great texture work, even though it's skin deep. My complaint here is, why do you have to have the faces so close to the player? I really don't want to see Ethan's nose hair, and I definitely don't need to see a close-up on Sean, who looks like a polygonal bowel movement. Yes, this is a cheap way of the developers showing you how good their characters look, but their movements betray the realism, because no one does this, no one moves their head and eyes like this, unless they're stressed out or nervous, or squirming in their seat because how fucking uncanny they look, like me. What I find ironic is that the future games in the Cageography never go this hard to push a realistic aesthetic, and in my opinion, it looks so much better. Well, mostly. This uncanny problem also shines a light on the disconnect between the polygons you see on screen and the real-life performances we hear. Going back to the subject of the actors, in my initial take of the performances, they just reeked of David Cage employing some thespians from a local amateur dramatics group and threw him in this cast with reckless abandon.
Nope.
In fact, I was surprised who was in this production. While the main actors in this game don't have the Hollywood level of star power, all of them do have extensive rap sheets in terms of work. And while picking through the interviews, demo reels and behind the scenes footage for clues, you can see that most of them can act. So the problem here is, how do we go from this...
Not a day goes by that I don't see his face. Now, Sean has got nothing to do with that, nor do any of the other children. This has to stop.
You've got to hand yourself into the police.
Look, if I hand myself into the police, I lose all chances of finding Sean. They'll question me, but I won't be able to tell them anything because I don't know anything.
To this.
Ethan, are you alright?
I failed the trial. I was supposed to kill a man. I couldn't do it.
You're not the origami killer, Ethan. You're not responsible.
Oh my god, I am so bored! Ah!
Is it me, or do these performances sound better than the final product? It feels like most of the lines in the game were taken from a table read rather than the final edited VO, and they took takes that range from Sleeping Pills to Cringeville, Tennessee. And it also highlights one of the biggest problems with Heavy Rain, the script. It's dull and lifeless and flat out embarrassing at times.
I'll see you again, asshole.
Are you alright?
Are you alright?
I don't want to see him anymore.
Sorry about the mess.
After all that action, are you alright?
Yeah.
So bad. Oh, fuck me. With a constant use of cinematic cliches, coupled with a supporting cast that is predominantly French, you end up with this chasm between the main cast and actors who are trying their best, but are hindered by the other actors not performing in their primary tongue. So you get more performances like this.
Come back when your fucking mother comes home from work.
He's drunk again.
What are we gonna do? It's pouring rain. We're gonna get soaked if we spend a day outside.
Hello, fellow human. I am also a fellow human.
And speaking of amateur, one thing I want to say about the sound design before we move on is that it's non-existent. Yes, there is music and sounds and people talking, but there was many a times when I'm playing this game and I'm having a really emotive moment, the pianos and the strings are playing, and then when you leave the room...
I'm gonna go find something to eat. Wait for me, I'll be back in 10 minutes.
Way to break my immersion. I'm really invested right now.
All around me are familiar faces, worn out.
As you may have guessed, that most of the story within Heavy Rain, especially between the intro and what we're about to dive into, is mostly inconsequential. And while there are some shocking moments, the rest is filled with fluff that within the context of this overall narrative does not go anywhere. And it's now time to unmask the biggest fish in this pond. Who is the origami killer? Who is the twisted twat that orchestrated this spree of brutality? A person that's been operating in the shadows to make all the players in this deadly game bend to his will. Yes, the origami killer is Private Detective Scott Shelby.
What? What the fuck?
Right, before I start going all content cop on this twist, I will say that I do like the idea of Shelby being the killer. I mean, what is more chilling than a person who swore an oath to protect and serve being the one who wants to cause you harm? It's a smart move that plays with the expectations of the player, just like me front-loading this paragraph with praise, because it will be shortly followed up with me talking shit about it. Ooh, what a twist. Oh my god. Within the context of Heavy Rain, Shelby being the killer and the reasons leading up to this reveal are nonsensical, lazy, and require so many leaps in logic, I question why they went for it in the finished product. Video games take a long time to produce and have hundreds of pairs of eyes looking at every aspect of the production. They are bespoke, measured works of craftsmanship that take a lot of time and effort to produce, if you ignore the exploitative, half-baked shite you see on Steam. And I know the team at Quantic are drinking the Cage Kool-Aid. Oh yeah! But couldn't one of them put their hand up and question why this twist is so poorly executed? The reason why I raise this question is because certain events that apparently transpire when the reveal takes place are not only sloppy, but some are flat out lies. There is a scene midway through the game where an envelope is given to Shelby by a woman called Lauren, who is a side character that tags along with Scott during his investigation, like a very obedient robot.
Maybe you better stay in the car.
We're partners, remember? Wherever you go, I go.
Hello, fellow human. I am also a fellow human.
Anyway, Lauren is one of the mothers affected by the origami killer. So this said envelope that she gives to Shelby has her address and her husband's name on it, which was sent the day her son was kidnapped. Shelby then discovers that the address on the envelope was made by a very specific typewriter, which looks very similar to the same make and model that's on Shelby's desk right now. Interesting. Which leads to a clip where we have a chat with the local typewriter repairman called Manfred. After some tasteful fast forwarding, Shelby discovers Manfred is dead.
Oh my god. He's dead.
Okay, I'll give it to Cage, that was a shocking turn. The thing is, when the twist happens at the end of the game, there is a little scene that shows Shelby bludgeoning this poor guy to death. And I have to say, I gasped. Not because this poor bastard met a very grisly end, no, by how dumb it is. In fact, I was shocked to see this amount of incompetence in terms of editing and scripting. I honestly thought it was a glitch. So I went and checked other gameplay videos on YouTube, and no, this is how the scene plays out in all versions. The thing is, when you're actually playing this scene in the context of the whole story, the way Shelby had to kill Manfred was in a time frame so small he had to either be using speed hacks or no clip, because it just doesn't add up. Let's analyse this scene. Right, so this shot consists of Shelby, Manfred and Lauren. You see Manfred goes off into the back room to get this thing for the investigation, and then it's followed by this 14-second cutaway where we don't see Shelby. And yes, I timed it. In this 14 seconds, you see Lauren malfunctioning, trying to run her human.exe file, and getting a nice zooming on that ballerina dancing thing that every nu metal music video had in the early 2000s. And then it cuts back to Shelby. But then when you line these two scenes up together, you can see where Shelby kills Manfred and it takes about 20 seconds to do the whole thing. Yes, I am fully aware I'm being incredibly pedantic about this, and you could argue this is just artistic expression and not to be taken literally. But may I remind you, this whole thing was to cover up the envelope that Lauren gave Shelby that could expose him as the origami killer, which makes this whole sequence smell of convoluted bullshit and also a writer writing in a stream of consciousness. He's just going on, but he's not thinking about where it's going. Because the easy way out of this whole scenario was for Shelby to club Lauren to death like a French baby seal, because she has no family or friends that we know of, so they wouldn't spot her being missing if she disappeared. And let's be honest, it would be a great service to mankind to stop the cyborg menace before they take over the Earth. And furthermore, and more critically, she has nothing to do with this story. This whole part of the game is superfluous. You could have got rid of it and it wouldn't have affected the story at all. It would have been just gone and we could have moved on with our lives. And this is just a little example of one of the many reasons why Heavy Rain just does nothing for me. And while it's the height of hubris to think that I would have a better way of writing this story, it does bring into focus what the fuck was David Cage doing, apart from making a 2,000-page manuscript for r/brain cells.
All around me are familiar faces, worn out.
Right, so after this little break just to calm down, it's now time to pick apart the finale, or 17 of them. Alright, I'm joking, we're only going to do a few because most of them don't fucking matter, but let's get on with it. After getting 4 different endings, yes, I played this game 3 more times than I would have cared for, there was a shared feeling across all 4 of these playthroughs. They were all deeply unsatisfying. And no, I'm not one of those annoying dicks that think everything has to end on a good note. Hell, some of my favourite games have down or ambiguous endings, because what is a better tool than using your own imagination to come up with a worthwhile conclusion? Well, until you bring out a sequel that cocks the ambiguity up, am I right, lads? Sorry. When it comes to Heavy Rain, these resolutions come from another angle. Most of them are either saccharine or baffling. And the only finale with any kind of payoff is the one where Lauren kills Shelby. The problem here is that this resolution is apparently a bad ending. Let me reiterate, the ending where a sadistic killer gets his comeuppance by a woman whose child died, that is also fueled by the other families that have been tormented by this sick twat, is only unlocked if you play the game incorrectly.
All you did was collect the evidence you'd left behind. Wipe out your past and feed on the misery of the parents whose children you've killed. I swore on my son's grave that I would kill the man who murdered him. I'm gonna keep my word.
But this isn't the worst thing Heavy Rain has to offer. After 10 hours of this bollocks, what is the link between Scott the origami killer Shelby and Ethan the best dad 5 ever Mars? You know, the emotional core of this entire story. The thing that is supposed to keep us engaged, to keep us on the edge of our seats. The link is, my little cheeky breaky, is this.
Who are you?
Oh, you don't know me, Ethan. Oh, but we've met before.
The only thing that ties the main characters is a contrived edit that Shelby saw Ethan at the mall when his son died. And that was the spark to put him through the gauntlet of piss-weak saw traps to prove his daddy-dom traits. Okay, I can give it a little leeway because we saw Shelby in the opening act and it would have blown his cover instantly. But this reveal comes off as so fucking cheap. And to pull another example of how you can do this twist really well is Spec Ops: The Line. And while it shares the same twist, you are playing from a character that is hallucinating this whole story. And when you realise it's a figment of his imagination, all the pieces of the puzzle that didn't really make any sense fall into place. Also, its careful use of symbolism and surrealism play directly into this reveal. And I hate to spoil it for this video because we're talking about fucking Heavy Rain, but it's a perfect example of how to use this twist in a really effective way. But instead of screaming my tits off about this, here is some more fan fiction for you. Okay, how cool would it have been if Jason died and the cops put the blame on Ethan for causing his son's death, either by negligence or manslaughter, which then caused Ethan to do a couple of years in the clink for a crime he didn't commit. And then when he finally gets out and ends up living in a shitty flat all depressed and stuff, he then gets a call from his ex-wife or a letter saying that his remaining son has been kidnapped. And because he doesn't trust the cops, he reaches out to Shelby and Madison to help him investigate. And then you can have Maddie doing the seduction thing and getting her tits out, blah blah blah. And then you have the private investigator who's taking great pleasure passively tormenting our lead with all that Saw shit. And then when the reveal happens, you have an emotional investment in this trio of characters, ergo making a very satisfying conclusion. Well, in my eyes anyway. Also, please, Mr. Cage, I need a job. Please. And now I have a twist for you. This is why I did a long bloated description of the intro, because this is just a microcosm of everything wrong with Heavy Rain. Press X to Jason. Press X to Sean. It's a cheap and poor excuse of trying to push emotive moments into something we haven't built any feelings for. David Cage is so adamant he wants you to feel for his characters, but he does it in such a way that doesn't deserve or warrant your affection, because we haven't built any attachment to them in either length of time or just general investment. And what makes it more baffling is he treats emotions like they're a template you can drop into your games and then boom, there you go. Here is your new favourite character, love them. It just doesn't work that way, and he's just generally missing the wood for the trees, because any game, regardless of genre, can stir your feelings in multiple different ways, without the developers telling you how to feel. And that's the thing, the artificiality of everything in Heavy Rain absolutely kills the immersion for me. This is a fake world with fictional entities born to do the bidding of the storyteller, who fundamentally doesn't get humanity, and more importantly, has no clue about drama, who treats the interactivity of his said games to be a bad thing, and treat you like you cannot be trusted to behave accordingly. Ethan did not cut his finger off to prove he was a worthy father. You were forced to do it because you had to, because if you didn't, the story would end right there and there'd be no resolution. This wasn't made for people who wanted to escape the mundanity of life. This was a shallow attempt at Oscar bait, of stealing concepts from another medium to try and grab the golden joysticks and other phallic symbols made out of precious metals. This, my friends, is the anti-video game, where nothing has meaning. It's an existential void that will suck out your soul and make you hate the one thing you truly love in life. Not even natural selection can take place here. The world is being engulfed in truth, and this is the way the world of video games ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper.
Wait, no, this can't be right. I love video games. Why am I being like this? There must be something in Heavy Rain that is satisfying or decent. Something that we can stop bitching about. Oh, the good ending. Surely that must be some sort of redeemable quality inside. It can't be all fucking trash.
Nope.
Okay, Ethan and Madison put the past behind them and start a new life together. But, excuse me, this doesn't make any cocking sense because Madison only went to Ethan because she thought he was the origami killer, which means those two getting together after this whole sordid fucking scenario makes Ethan look like a complete and total FBI agent Norman Jayden, remember him? Becomes a guest on a talk show and then flushes his viral cyber smack down the toilet because not only he's a member of the Bureau, he was also a drug addict, and this said drug kept him from going cyber mad when he was in VR. And Lauren spits on Shelby's grave, because the better ending of this whole fucking game was locked behind playing the game incorrectly. And yes, I know vigilantism is bad, truth and justice and all that bollocks, but this bloke is a deranged serial killer that would most probably die for his crimes if he was convicted, so going Frank Castle on this bitch is justified. Nah, bollocks to that, let the least important character have a fist fight on top of a garbage disposal machine, which ends in the origami killer falling to his death. Because the writer couldn't see that he had a decent finale, so he had to conjure up some empty spectacle to be more palatable for this type of resolution. I don't fucking know. And fuck me with a fish fork, that is the end of this game. And sodomize me with several more kitchen utensils. That was one of the worst games I have ever played. And I know that's very cliche to say, but fuck you. This is rock bottom. Look, I'm not here to shit on people who enjoy this game. If you unironically love it, then all the power to you. And I can totally get why people liked it, especially at the time of its release. I can also respect Quantic's push for emotive storytelling in an industry that really didn't emphasize this type of narrative. But shit on a shepherd's sheepdog, going back to play Heavy Rain 10 years later, was a dull and irritating slog that doesn't seem to end or shut the fuck up. Which sucks because I love the world and the actors playing these characters are fucking great at their job. And it sucks because I've fallen in love with games like this before, like LA Noire, and that is one of my favourite games of all time. And while it was cathartic to riff on Heavy Rain in video form, it was also a very depressing game to play. And what makes it frustrating is that I can see the nuggets of greatness stuck in the miasma of underbaked ideas and bloat. Because David Cage doesn't know when to stop, and he thinks that more means a better product. No, less is more. If you polish a few decent ideas, then you might have a fighting chance to create something memorable. But no, you threw in more sloppy, unrefined ideas that not only impede the flow of the game, but push its narrative beyond breaking point. Perhaps it was a loss in translation, and perhaps he was in need of an editor or a writing mentor. I don't know. And I don't fucking care. And with all that said, the only accolade I can give David Cage for Heavy Rain, the only glowing star next to his name, is that he managed to create a thriller that is not thrilling. Look, I didn't start the series to go dumpster diving for games, like an over-opinionated, neck-bearded raccoon. But somehow, the further I dig into the Cageography, the more sandwiches covered in cat piss I seem to find. In less words, it's been a eye-opening experience indeed, if that I was goatsy.cx. This is an appropriate reference, because a horrendous photo of a man pulling his rusty cage open that you would send to your mates as a joke is a perfect metaphor for this game. Sadly, that rush of seeing a friend repel in disgust is replaced by some of the most depressing imagery I have ever seen, and not the way the man behind this artistic shitfit intended. And I know I'm hitting the bad game gong very early, but there isn't anything positive to say here, and the bits of praise I have for Beyond Two Souls feel like they're good by accident. And to be clear, I'm not here to drag Quantic Dream. What they can do on a technical level is stunning, so the complaints in this video are solely on the story aspect, and we know who is the culprit, and I can already feel the bile rising in my throat. And lastly, before we get into this, I will be spoiling the shit out of this game, so if you want to play it before I... play the game. In an interview with James Gallagher back in 2012 for the official PlayStation blog, our bringer of narrative doom commented on the landscape of games at the time. You see, in his view,
if this industry wants to mature and evolve, then we need to talk about emotions and work on stories that appeal to all people, not just hardcore gamers between the ages of 15 and 17. We have a much wider market out there just waiting to interact if we can go to them with the right ideas.
Also, I'd like to highlight this comment that Cage goes on to say, in perfect text-to-speech,
no good stories are written by 50 people. A story is something emotional, personal, that you want to share, and it is strongly linked to your own life and experiences.
I would also like to note that this interview was done a year before Beyond was released, so while he isn't referencing what he's about to unleash, get ready to see him gloriously contradict this statement. And then he goes on to say,
"We need auteurs, and the biggest problem in this industry is that we don't trust them. Auteurs are scary, because they come back with ideas, but that is exactly what this industry should be about. Hello human, I am also a fellow human."
While it sounds like our favourite auteur director is an old man yelling at monster-soaked clouds, and it is, I do mostly agree with him, which must be a fucking first. In an industry, God, every time I say that I feel like I should be wearing fucking Joker makeup. In a society, whatever. In an industry where mainstream games are just getting bigger and demanding bigger teams to create, there are numerous examples of games and stories being written by committee. And while most examples can get away with this monkeys with typewriters mentality, most of them just sound absolutely soulless and feel like they've been written for the lowest common denominator. Shout out to Borderlands 3. And while I personally prefer the singular or small team when it comes to writing in games, you need to be incredibly careful and self-aware of what you're saying, because you have fewer people to bounce these ideas from, and if this said idea is stupid, you're gonna look like a fucking chump. Take Hideo Kojima as an example. Yes, he has created some of the most compelling worlds in gaming, and has been doing it longer than the auteur in question. But when you line up all his games, arguably his best work was when he had a team of writers around him to mould, shape and filter all these ideas into a coherent narrative. Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3 are perfect examples of these types of collaborations, and they've been regarded as a high watermark for exceptional writing, theming and resonating with an audience far beyond its release date. Contrast this with Metal Gear Solid 4 and 5, and while these two games still had that creative spark, it lacked the filter, and Unfiltered Kojima is a mood unto itself.
So, you like Suikoden?
Nope. A perfect example of this trail of thought is the boss from Metal Gear Solid 3. The boss is a leader of a special forces unit tasked to take on the most critical of missions for the good old United States. She is also the mother figure for Snake, who looks up to her even when she turns her back on him and her country. In any lesser game, especially the ones later in the series, the boss would have been just another villain to overcome in a display of jingoistic glory. However, throughout the story, we find out why she turned on her country and her protege, and it's fucking heartbreaking. And that is completely down to Kojima and his team putting on a masterclass of toying with the expectations of the player and made what could have been a by-the-numbers villain into something more. And then look at Quiet in Metal Gear Solid 5. And while she does have a reason to be half naked, when she's waving her ass in front of my face, I am not thinking there is an ulterior motive for her to be doing that. I just question if Kojima needs to hydrate on something else, rather than a near-mute blow-up doll with daddy issues. What the fuck is Metal Gear Survive? And you're probably asking another important question. Why the fuck am I talking about Metal Gear Solid? Isn't this supposed to be a rant about some serious art for once? And I can't even say that with a fucking straight face. However, this tirade is here for a reason. While good Kojima is some of the best storytelling in gaming, it is the exact polar opposite of the person we're going to be talking about again today. And before we move on to the very first chapter of this fucking long video, I would like to highlight DC's comment that we don't trust auteurs, because it's fucking hilarious. And I'm sure that joke will wear itself thin by the end of this video. Chapter 1. Ghost Tales. Just like in the Heavy Rain review, if you haven't seen it already, please check it out. I won't be doing a blow-to-blow account of the plot, because there isn't one for the majority of this fecking game. Spoiler alert. And the funny thing is, if you read the synopsis on Wikipedia, the plot looks theoretically interesting.
Too long, didn't read. Too long, didn't read it.
Mostly due to the person who wrote that passage is a fucking wordsmith. So if you get confused, it's not my fault. It's down to David Cage doing what he does best, which is a nice way of saying he pukes on a Microsoft Word document and then gets Mr. Clippy to arrange it in the dumbest way possible. Alright, we start off beyond... fuck me, saying this title is like a bukkake party for the vocal cords. We start off beyond wordy wordy wank wank with our lead protagonist Jody Holmes. played by actor Elliot Page, regurgitating quotes from Jaden Smith's Twitter account like it's some profound crap that isn't a load of dissociated drivel. Meanwhile, in the actual intro, we see Jody being interviewed by a police officer who found her drifting in the middle of nowhere, but our heroine sandbags him by the power of being dead inside, my kind of woman. This scene is quickly broken by the point man from Fear, busting in with a bunch of armoured buddies to arrest Jody. Hey, first question, why would a SWAT team raid a police department? You would think they would be on the same page, right? Oh, sorry, I forgot. I'm playing a David Cage game where logic goes to fucking die. Anyway, ignore that because a man in a sharp suit, who's also on the hunt for Jody, arrives to find that point man and his crew have been killed. Oh look, it's Hollywood actor William Dafoe, who looks like his underbite was stapled to his forehead. Clap everyone, fucking clap! And then we jump to another time where Jody and her partner Ryan, who is a complete asshole, is on a mission to infiltrate this fancy dinner party and do some spy shit, I guess. And we also soon discover the first personality trait of our avatar, which is incessant complaining.
I feel like everyone's looking at us.
That's not just a feeling, everyone is looking at us.
This dress sucks. I knew I should have worn something else. So do you want me to act natural or do you want me to smile?
Oh my God! Shut the fuck up!
Also, and more interesting, Jody has ghost powers that she can use to hack stuff and... sorry, I've got a nosebleed. I know DC most of the time has no concept in world building, but this rapid fire display of telling the player fuck all is a lot to take in. So, Cage, slow down and give us an idea of what the balls is going on. What is the connecting thread between all these little vignettes, apart from the nothing we established earlier? You see, Beyond Good Pacing's plot is structured in a non-linear way, where we follow Jody through 17 years of her life growing up on a government black site. You know, the wholesome American upbringing. And the reason why she's at the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters is that she has a ghostly entity called Aiden attached to her, which grants our lead with various Deus Ex Machinas. In this story, we flip-flop between Jody as a kid, living with Casper the friendly plot contrivance, and Jody frothing over boys that have the personalities of the Paul brothers, while being trained to become a CIA spook. Sorry, being forced to train as a whiny version of Sam Fisher because she has zero autonomy throughout the whole story. Also, this early sequence is a sneaky way to shove in a tutorial where we are treated to the cover-based stealth mechanics. I know, holy shit! David Cage is going to treat us like a gamer this time, and not some lobotomized twat with 10 pegs for funds. Yeah, dream on, fucko. And I want to show you this sizzling character moment at the end of this scene, where Jody's main squeeze, the ever so lovable Ryan, puts a gun to her head and says some manly bullshit.
Not bad, Jody. But if this wasn't an exercise, you'd be dead by now.
If this wasn't an exercise, you wouldn't even be able to open your big mouth, Ryan.
Oh man, that romantic tension is so thick you could taste it. Speaking of shit, this whole Tarantino-style non-linear story structure makes no sense, and it screams of David Cage trying to put a pseudo-intellectual spin on this very linear story. So much so, when the game got re-released on the PS4 and the PC, it also comes with a mode where you can play the game in chronological order, which then highlights why the story was structured in this manner in the first place. Because flipping between these two timelines at this rapid pace, for one, do not complement each other, and two, they are polar opposites in terms of theme. One is big and loud, and the other is cute yet benign, which, in a well-paced piece of media, the quiet would complement the bombastic. While you can have a story that doesn't rely on adrenaline-filled conveyance, we know for a fact that our Lord and Saviour of narrative design isn't the Master Chief he believes he is. And in his hubris, he does, well, honestly, what do you think he does? He does absolutely fuck all. I can't help it. David Cage puts me in this mood. I'm trying to be cordial, I'm trying to be analytical, and try to avoid this angry gamer bullshit, but... Sorry. What makes this non-linear structure maddening is we as the player have to keep track of what, where and when at all times, because the narrative has not been written in a way where it complements our attention span, or presented in a way that can be easily followed, which compounds another issue that most of these scenes, especially from Jody's childhood, have no influence over the story. So this use of a meta-narrative framing to tell this said story is absolutely meaningless. So, to try and mask that this story has no plot, DC has mixed up the order of the scenes to stop you from getting bored. In less words, the opening is front-loaded to all fuck, the middle is padded like the writer's pompous nature, and the ending, oh yeah, we will get to that in time. It's a lot. It's a lot. A lot of, I've got nothing. Shit. And while we're bitching about the structure, once again our scholar of the scatological has forgotten one of the main rules of effective character building. That is, writing a story at the most interesting time of our protagonist. While the marketing states that this story covers 15 years of Jody's life, even though it's actually 17 years, if you know how to fucking count, the actual interesting part of her life could be boiled down to 6 to 12 months. Or in raw playtime, about 3 to 4 hours. And that is being generous, given the average playtime of Beyond Testing My Fucking Patience is around 11 to 12 hours long, meaning we spend around 6 to 7 of these watching Jody grow up and go through more phases in the entire video game industry, which in their own contained moments are fine if this game was say episodic, but going through the whole story as Cage intended in this Tarantino-esque affair is an endurance test, made even more annoying because for most of the game, Jody is the protagonist but she lacks a personal motivation, or any goals in general, and DC is not interested in giving her a carrot on a stick that isn't contrived. Well, until the methadone wears off and he realises that he's been typing in fucking wingdings for the last 6 hours. So the main ebb and flow of this entire game, we are just spinning around in this miasma of teen drama without a through line to move the story forward. And while I can give David credit for going with this non-linear story and go through Jody's life in painstaking detail, it's still incomprehensible to the average gamer due to his writing.
Oh, the irony! It's too much!
Chapter 2. Not like the other girls. As we are in this oasis of praising the prince of pen-shaped penises, sort of, one of the best moves that DC made during the production of this game was hiring Elliot Page to play the lead, because he is a charming performer with a long line of entertaining work, and more importantly has the chops to pull off a decent performances with shit scripts. Also, moaning about his likeness being ripped off in The Last of Us, which in hindsight just sounds like a pallet of sour grapes. One of the reasons why I struggled to relate to Jody was due to how this game structured its relationship between itself and the player, is because DC once again wants to make a film rather than an interactive experience. Ergo, you are a passive consumer of this story. Yes, you may push the game forward by using a lump of plastic between your greasy palms, but that is as far as the connection goes between you and David Cage's brand new love pillow. This passivity means that Jody as a playable avatar is externalized from the player, which is not normal but has worked in the past. The reason why she doesn't work as a relatable character is because she is so one-dimensional and a full-on, uncut, MTV fucking unplugged Mary Sue. Or Nathan Drake if you hate the gendering of an overpowered holier-now character that has no opposing problems or human personality traits, and both coincidentally like murdering minorities. However, in Beyond character building, all that Jody does is cry like a burst water pipe, moan about shit like a conceited dingbat, or kick so much ass it puts the Doomslayer to shame. And while she has a few charming moments, mostly due to the actor portraying her, Jody's character is put on the pedestal so high, it's hard for us to buy into her struggle whenever one is presented, because she is invincible. Even with this contentious discourse and the toxic gender bullshit, Jody's sooness can be applied to her because her character is too perfect. Everything is handed to her on a silver platter. Nothing is earned, nothing is gained, and coupled with her powers, she has no need to complain about anything. But she does it all the damn time. And furthermore, David Cage has warped the entire world around Jody, so every character and every story beat bends to her will. She is the center of this universe, and if she no longer existed, the universe would disappear with her, which leads to Jody being a very boring character. And no matter how much trauma that's in her life, we know she will never learn or grow. Because, and say it with me, she is invincible. And instead of circumventing this trope, our esteemed writer, like everything he writes, decided to embrace this, and then ironically couldn't find a way to tame the monster he created himself. And what I find even more infuriating is that he is incredibly lazy in finding interesting ways for her to overcome these said challenges. Oh no, Jody's injured and surrounded by militia that is kicking down the door to kill her. Ah, no biggie. Let the ghost of JC Denton heal her wounds so she can escape without consequence. Oh shit, Jody is trapped in a burning building with a pregnant lady. What are we going to do? Oh, never mind. She can use her impenetrable shield of bullshit to get through anything because DC's OC has to get through everything with unsatisfying ease. So if Jody isn't being challenged, it is boring for the people trying to watch her cheat her way out of every situation. And with no satisfaction, all you have is a void, which is 11 hours long, and it's fun. I love it. It's a 10 out of 10 from IGN, and I would happily sodomize myself with a DVD copy of Man of Steel, in awe of its greatness. And before you do it, I know some chinfuck will say that Jody does not have control of her powers. It's Aiden that does all this stuff on his own accord. And okay, fair enough. The problem is that I don't think DC got that memo, because there are so many times where Jody flips her powers on without question. So you might want to remind him, rather than leave a comment that reads like a rant typed on a fucking Etch-a-Sketch. Man, I'm so salty today. And if you need some more cringe on your croissant, get it because he's French, ha 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 ha. There is a scene in his game called Like Other Girls, where Jody has a temper tantrum because Dr. Daddy says no to her going out with her friends. Also, Jody is goth for some fucking reason. Anyway, I just wanted to highlight this.
How come everyone can go and I can't? I do everything you ask of me all week, and I never get to have any fun!
For the 100th time, you're not like everyone else, and there are rules.
Well, I didn't ask to be different. I just want to go out and have friends and be like other girls my age.
You'll never be like them. You need to get used to that. Good night.
Ah!
Are you sure that's the keeper?
Ah!
Would you like to take another take?
Ah!
No?
Ah!
Okay.
Ah!
The voice of the downtrodden.
Ah!
The rebel yell.
Ah! Ah! Ah!
Wait. I have another one. The voice of a generation.
Ah!
Oh, fuck me. But that is just the tip of this glorious display of stupidity. Now, it's time to talk about Jody and her little trip to Somalia. Chapter 3, Call of Jody, K-Jobs. Or Twattlefield, I don't know, I'm just trying to make an amusing name for this chapter. Oh wait, I got another one. Fuck up the line. Shit.
You know, very often when you write a game about a hero in the Second World War, you don't have a clue about what it feels to be a hero during a war because you never lived that. When you write about a guy saving a country from zombies, you don't have a clue what it feels like because you've never done that.
Oh, so that's why we are killing minorities while dressed like Daddy's little insurgent. While this interview, just like the one we cited earlier, was done before the release of Beyond Two Souls, I find it interesting that good old DC bent the rules to tell his deeply emotional story from his own experience. Come on, we all know that's bullshit. He is the Tom Clancy of contradictions. Anyway, Jody is tasked to go to Somalia to take out some kind of war chief that is threatening America because America, fuck yeah, I don't know. But you do get to use that stealth training you probably forgot how to use by the time you get to use it. Why? Because this level takes place 8 hours into the game. Jesus, the pace of this fucking thing is like a porn film without the sex. While I shouldn't complain because we get to finally play the game, and pressing X to strangle dudes is spicy, if honestly a needless sequence, I can't shake off this feeling that should have been a quick time event, because this level is only here to compete with the big boys, which is kind of funny in respect that he always talks about the spunk guggle wee wee, but it seems like he wants to drink it under the table. In that regard, I'll just let him write a Call of Duty game. Can't be any worse than the shit he puts out now, and it also feels like it drags on forever. And what amplifies this feeling is the clunky controls. It feels like I'm playing Gears of War with a controller made out of concrete. And get this, in the bonus features you can unlock a behind the scenes video where they go in depth on the gameplay. And I love this part.
During the process of this production, we made what we call user tests.
You just watch people playing and you see where they succeed, where they fail.
If a player don't get it right, it's only our fault. So we work very hard to be able to correct it and give the best experience possible.
After each user test, it's meeting after meeting just to find a good solution to every single issue the player may have had.
Yes, David Cage and his little team want you to believe that he invented playtesting, a well-known establishment in the gaming industry for like 30 fucking years. This game is polished to such a mirror shine you can see the bullshit. Alright, I'm being hyperbolic, this sounds more like a featurette for people who've never played a game before, but still, it's bollocks. And swinging back to this level, what makes it so uncomfortable to witness is Cage tries to crowbar some social commentary, such as when Jody finds out that child soldiers are a thing. War is hell. And later on when our heroine finds out this supposed war chief is an elected politician that she was duped into killing because America is evil, I guess? Actually, editor, can you just put in that Ace Ventura clip again? War is hell. Thank you. Okay, Cage, slow down. These sophomoric political hot takes could set a swimming pool on fire. But at least this is where a fucking motivation for this cocking story begins. As Jody, on hearing this news, decides to run away from the CIA. Honestly, I'm just glad that we have a connecting thread to drive this story forward. Shame it took David Cage 80 bloody years to get to the fucking point. And this is followed by 2 other scenes where Jody becomes a bum, and we'll swing around to that later, and a scene where Jody ends up on a Native American reservation. And if you thought David Cage struggled with conventional storytelling, get ready to see some flagrant racist shit. Alright, so we catch up with Jody, who ends up drifting in the desert and finds a farm in the middle of nowhere, owned by Paul and his family. After the most intense meal known to man, Jody finds out that something is wrong with this place. Perhaps there's another scene that goes fucking nowhere. After the family dodges all of Jody's questions, she finds out there is an entity that is tormenting the family that was summoned by their ancestors to drive out the White Devil during the Civil War. And this beastie torments the family every single night who are powerless to fight it. So here comes the white saviour on a pearly steed to swoop in to save the tribe. Oh dear. It's yes another example of David Cage ploughing through a problematic part like a fucking drunk driver. With that said, I kind of like this level. Now, don't quote me wrong here. I don't like the ineptitude of DC's handling of culture that he has no experience with. No, I mean if you took this scene and gave it a rewrite or 5, it could have been a cool idea, where Jody travels to different places to bust ghosts with a satisfying payoff, which you can guess are few and far between in this 11-hour yawn printed on a fucking Blu-ray disc. Chapter 4, Misery Porn. While on the run from the CIA, Jody finds out that her family she had as a kid were government agents tasked in fostering her. And no, this shit doesn't matter, but there's so much stuff to unpack, I can't throw away the suitcase. And her real mum, Nora, who is a gifted individual herself, was put into a coma after Jody's birth and put in hiding for 24 years. Anyway, Jody manages to sneak her way into the mental hospital where her catatonic mother is held. Basically, Jody and Nora have a chinwag, and because she's been in a vegetative state for so long, there is no way she can leave. And then you get given the choice to leave her here, or pull the plug on the machine that's keeping her mum alive. The thing is, when I was watching this scene, the question that kept running through my mind is, why is this here? What purpose does this have, apart from another fucking excuse for Jody to cry? Which you could argue this time is justified. But to me, this scene just smells of misery porn. It's here because it's now time to feel the emotions, and serves no purpose. It's vapid, it's masturbatory. It might as well have that Pornhub community intro play before the scene. Also, why would Jody do this? I know that her mum will be sat here catatonic for the rest of her days, but pulling her plug just feels wrong. But like most things in this story, none of it matters. Just like the last few hours of Jody being AWOL are rendered pointless as she is kidnapped by the CIA to do one last mission. Hooray! And my god, is this thing completely pointless and so stupid. Right, so Jody is briefed by a new character. Let's call him General Generic, and he is tasking her to go to the fictional land of Kazakhstan, not Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan. Alright, cool. This mission, if she chooses to accept it and she's forced into it because she has no autonomy, great game, is to close another Infraworld portal that the filthy communist nation is harbouring from the United States, because the CIA play by the fuck you got mine rules of modern warfare. Also, I find it funny that all the military dudes here are Asian, perhaps of Chinese descent. Oh, okay, so a real African country that has had its fair share of trouble is fair game for a shitty stealth level. But a fictional Chinese governed country is too close for comfort, huh? I guess that explains why the PC port came out on the Epic Game Store first. However, once again, and I keep repeating myself here, none of this shit matters. This whole sequence, which is like an hour long, has no bearing on the overall story, and is another example of how this fucking game flows like a compacted bowel. The story at this point feels like David Cage is being paid by the word, so it will go on these long diatribes that go absolutely nowhere. And then when you go through it, you look back in hindsight and think, what was the point in that? This whole mission screams of this. Yes, it does further the relationship between Jody and that other asshole I've forgotten the name of already, but their relationship we'll get into later is completely pointless as well. So, I feel like I'm losing my mind. And speaking of a character that looks constipated, this is Nathan. If you don't remember, is played by William Dafoe. And if you've seen any of his films, he's usually typecast as the bad guy, especially later in his career. Like when he scared the shit out of my nephew as the Green Goblin in Spider-Man, and playing a fucking psychopath in one of my favourite films, Antichrist. Jesus. He also played Jesus at one point. Throughout this story, he is the chief scientist in charge of assessing Jody and Aiden. And over this passage of time, they develop a father-daughter style relationship. Honestly, it's cute, if not a little creepy at the same time. I think it's because of the face. However, halfway through the plot, Jody starts seeing the ghosts of a woman and a girl, which turns out that these two are Nathan's family, who has just died in a car accident. And it's another power that Jody has that comes out of nowhere, drink a shot. This is quickly followed by another sequence, where Jody can channel the ghosts of other people, so they can chat to their loved ones. This moment sets Nathan on a path to the dark side, where he takes over the paranormal division of the CIA that is studying a massive portal to the infraworld called the Black Sun. Now, you're probably wondering if we are told about this gate before this point. Nope, it's just here now, deal with it. And is another plot device smashing through the wall like a glory hole in a church. While I may rail on it, I do kind of like this idea, which I can't really put my finger on, but I find it kind of cool. And this leads to the reveal that Nathan has been working on a plan to merge the land of the living with the infraworld, so he can be with his family once again. And yes, this deeply emotional story with mature themes has become an episode of the fucking Power Rangers.
You're suffering, Nathan. If you love them, if If you really love them, you've got to let them go. You can't cheat death.
Cheat death? Death is nothing! You hear me? Nothing!
You want some brown sauce on that ham? Jeez. And I find it hard to buy that he's in denial about hurting his family. I mean, look at them. If that's not a cry for help, I don't know what is. I wonder if that's a metaphor for the staff at Quantic Dream. Shit, it could be a metaphor for the twats who play this fucking mess. Actually, that could be a metaphor for how I'm feeling reviewing this entire shite-ass series. Well, there's no time to cry, as this is when the shit hits the fan in both writing and story, because Jody tries to leave the CIA once and for all, but gets knocked out and kidnapped, and then Jody wakes up to find out she's tied to her bed, with General Generic looking at her like a fucking creep. And just like any Bond villain from the 1960s, he proceeds to tell Jody his grand plan, and put her in the same chemical-induced coma as her mother. Seriously, the stakes get risen so much in the last hour of this game, even Gordon Ramsay would tell you they're fucking overcooked. Whatever, this scene is used to finally show Nathan's heel turn, and tell Jody that he's gonna follow through with that garbage idea from earlier. And if you weren't paying attention, the problem with this plan is that the Infraworld is not just full of friendly ghosts. It has these evil fish-looking things, as well as other Bloodborne boss rejects that will cause a few problems if let out. And then, unsurprisingly, when Nathan pops the cork, we see the army that is supposed to protect the agents in this secret paranormal facility get absolutely slaughtered. And then it occurred to me, why are they carrying assault rifles? What are they gonna do? Shoot them with ghost bullets? And this is where Jody decides to chase Nathan down and stop this plan. Pause. Before we go down this path, we need to tie up some loose ends. Chapter 5. Brotherly Love. Remember the part where Jody was on the run and ends up living rough for a spell? Right, there is one bit where Jody is busking for food, and she sings a song so well it turns the day to night.
Make it hard to leave you alone, to leave you here, wearing your wounds.
Oh, and the name of this song? Lost Cause. You get it? It's because Jody's now destitute. She's a lost cause. Fuck me, DC, you have zero self-awareness. And apparently, Elliot Page played this tune on Cage's guitar, and it was all done in one take. Which is cool, I guess. I wish he cracked that fucking thing over his head, but whatever. And if you didn't think this game was a wank mag for nihilists, there is a scene where Jody is introduced to the 4 horsemen of homeless stereotypes. You have a man whose life crumbled because his partner died. You have the drug addict that picked his illness over the roof over his head. You have the former teacher turned drunkard, who is a nice guy but fell on hard times. And of course, you have the pregnant lady who escaped her abusive partner because David Cage loves broken homes. Shit, Jody came from a pair of broken homes herself. Yes, she's such a Mary Sue, she has double domestic abuse. Great writing there, Cage. Brilliant. And there isn't a problem that our hero can't fix, because Jody uses her healing powers to cure these poor bastards. Yes, she can cure all your ills, but can't use her powers to stop the systematic oppression of the working class that is year on year being strangled by rising taxes and diminishing pay, while being brought up in a culture that promotes gross commercialism. Oh, sorry, wrong meeting. That speech is for my comrades down at the docks tonight. Let me find the correct reply. Ah, shit, I know I had it here somewhere. Ah, here it is. Fuck you, David Cage. Speaking of fucking, these segues are fire, let's talk about the multiple men in Jody's life, especially Aiden and Ryan. Sadly, that Indian boy in the white saviour section is way too generic to talk about, and the actual chemistry was between Jody and his younger brother. But for some reason she ends up frothing over this chuckle fuck. But even saying that is way too many words to describe this fucking waste of time. Okay, the reason why Ryan is the romantic lead is that he is thrust upon us because he just is. Shut up. and his personality swings from a super macho abusive jarhead to a nice guy fuckboy that just wants to love Jody to the end of time. Blech. Both of these, as you can imagine, are bad looks, and it doesn't help that this romance is shoved down our throats. While you can repel his advances, because it's optional and it's one of the only things that you can actually make a choice about, the red flag here is perhaps treating her like a piece of meat and putting a gun to her head is a little bit unattractive. Hell, let's be honest, the whole framing of this entire relationship has so many red flags, you could call it the French Revolution. Anyway, after joining the CIA, we are treated to a scene where Jody and Ryan arrange a date for that evening. And I want to clarify that this date is about 2 years after she joined the CIA. And the reason why I mention this is because Jody is in her, say, late teens to very early 20s here, and Ryan is in his mid to late 30s, and he is already divorced. And while this isn't illegal, it's a little creepy. And the reason why I highlighted this is because Aiden starts to get a bit narky at the fact that Jody, who wants to do the horizontal split with her fuckboy, acts like a jealous boyfriend by locking her out and just causing havoc for her. And the relationship between Jody and Aiden has been a bit of a sassy platonic friendship anyway. It did stick out to me a little. And we also get a shower scene because of course, where we must press X to rub our avatar down with a towel, which is completely necessary, I'm sure. Also, you get to choose what outfit that Jody gets to wear for her date. So I chose the sexy option. Now, I have no fashion sense, so I don't know if this outfit is indeed sexy, but I have to admit my taste is so twisted, especially after 3 Quantic Dream games in a row. The only outfit that would light my fire right now is a gimp suit made out of David Cage's skin. And, of fucking course, DC's OC gets laid once a fucking again. I don't know why I bother mentioning this, as it's abundantly clear by now that the person who wrote this shit always types with one hand. Also, I want to reiterate that Aiden is watching everything that Jody is doing, which he can't help because he's tethered to her, he can't escape. However, the following piece of info will drastically change the perception of this entire relationship. You see, Aiden is Jody's brother. But wait, it gets worse. Oh god, there is a scene when this reveal happens where Jody has a heart-to-heart with her brother in the spirit world, and for some reason, he is bollock naked. And I know he's a ghost and everything, but he could at least cover up the meat and 2 veg. I mean, this whole scene is supposed to be touching, but the distraction of Aiden with his poltergeist pecker hanging out completely ripped me out of this scene. And I know David Cage has no filter or restraint, but I have to ask, how can you fuck up this bad? How can your messages be completely twisted to make your audience see this? Well, let's talk about it. Chapter 6. It's like Forrest Gump, but stupid. While I've made assumptions about this already in the Heavy Rain video, going through Beyond in its intended non-linear format has hammered home this feeling that Cage writes in his stream of consciousness, and I'll leave this here if you need a primer. Now, writing from a stream of consciousness is not inherently a bad thing. It has been a well-established concept in books for over 100 years, and it's mostly used from a first-person perspective, and tries to emulate the stream of thoughts a person would have, like what they see, what they smell, what they think, blah blah blah, you get the idea. The problem when it comes to how David Cage uses this style for narration is how unfocused he implements plots and subplots, with most of them popping up and disappearing at any given moment. He will come up with a great idea that will be dropped as soon as it's established, or he will have a contentious moment thrown into a scene where the mood contradicts that statement, and that is not including how he handles his characters. And while I've highlighted Jody and her Mary Sue-ness earlier, there are a ton of times where her character will change on a dime. She will be warm and friendly in one second, and a callous bastard the next. And while I did enjoy the actors and their performances, they are so hindered by this script. And something that really did hit me hard throughout this game When all these characters come from the same mind, after a while I felt like I'm being browbeaten by David Cage in a skirt, or David Cage the Butch Chad, or David Cage in blackface. They all may be separate characters played by separate actors, but they all talk in the same speech pattern, they all think in the same way, and their morality comes from the same source. It's like the fanfiction version of The Village of the Damned, which could be argued that I'm not separating the art from the artist. And maybe if I remove that parasocial relationship away from him, and maybe I'll enjoy his work more. But as we know by now, David Cage wants you to know that it's him behind this project. There is no escape from his narrative. So trying to apply the death of the author theory to analyse this game doesn't quite work. And with this stream of consciousness also comes a lack of care when it comes to DC's intent with his story. Because, well, Casper the Incestuous Ghost. Need I say more? And once again, I will say this, I don't think David Cage wanted to frame Aiden in this manner, but due to his hubris, or lack of creative control, he managed to push me, the consumer of this message, to come up with this conclusion. And while it's been turned up to a comedic level due to my satirical style, and because I'm making a video, this was my genuine impression. Now, you could argue that this is part of my twisted perception. And if this was an isolated incident, then sure, I see your point. But there is a spanner in the works when it comes to this line of thinking, and we will address that in the next chapter. However, before we get into that, you need to see this shit. When I was doing research for this series, one of the trends I noticed, especially when DC is promoting his games, was this notion that the size of his script for his upcoming project was a big deal. So you would get articles popping up for Heavy Rain or Beyond or Detroit that the following game would have a script that contains 2,000 pages, which, if you look at the number, it's pretty impressive, huh? No, it should be regarded as a fucking meme. You see, in the mind of our favourite author, he thinks that quantity is better than quality, and this 2,000 page script thing is used as a comparison to the average film screenplay, which is around 250 pages long. And you can guess this is dog shit. The reason why I mentioned this script thing, because I found something while diving into this bottomless pit, which hammered this narrative home. In a Facebook post made by video game journalist Dan Ackerman, he received a package from Sony the day after Earth Day, ironically, to celebrate the imminent release of the game. And yes, this is real. 2,000 hole-punched pages to signify the sheer girth of this deeply personal and very mature story. But the punchline is, all these pieces of paper are fucking blank. What a weird and very wasteful flex. But wait, there's more. This Insult the Trees was an announcement of Beyond 2-Ply being selected for the Tribeca Film Festival. I guess this nearly decade-long grift finally bore fruit. Or Cage has some compromising photos of the selection committee. No idea. But hey, look on the bright side. And not that fucking awful channel I mean disposition. At least Dan has plenty of toilet paper. While I've enjoyed clowning on the dumb stuff and trying to follow a story that was written in fucking crayon, now we have to go into a part of the game where this car crash writing style goes from frustrating yet comical into something potentially harmful. Chapter 7. Messages. To break character for a second, when I started the review of this series, my initial take of David Cage and Quantic Dream's output was pretty but pulpy trash. Nothing to be taken seriously, you know, that sort of shit. And while you could extract some triggering content to cancel, you know, the measured response when it comes to online discourse, if I knew ahead of time that the themes we were about to talk about in this game, honestly the series might not have happened. But now that we are here, we gotta talk about some stuff that is quite uncomfortable. Okay, to catch up with Jody, she makes her way to the Black Sun and confronts Nathan, who in turn pulls a gun on her. Jody, knowing that Nathan is in a great deal of pain due to his family passing away, manages to talk sense into him, and he relents and puts the gun down, to then turn the gun on himself and pulls the trigger. While this is a shocking turn of events, and I can empathise with his grief, and I can also see why he would do such a thing. I may not personally agree with his outcome, but I get it. The thing is, once he takes his life, Nathan is instantly rewarded with the loving embrace of his family, and this somber yet uplifting music begins to play, and then the camera pans to Jody. and she is smiling. And then Nathan, after finally being reunited with his family, vanishes into the ether. Now, I'm not sure how you would react to this sequence. My impression of this scene felt like it was an endorsement of suicide, and this sad and difficult moment is treated as a triumphant display. The family are not shocked that Nathan took his life in this manner. They just hug him without question. Everything is good and he got what he wanted. There is no deeper meaning, no storytelling, and it just feels like another empty display of sadness that is here for the uncultured swines to react accordingly. Sorry, I'm getting a little angry here. This is very, very gross. And I get the intent that Nathan is supposed to be a well-meaning man that happens to fall to this darkness brought on by his grief, and that is relatable. The problem is, the reason why I barely talked about him in this video is because within the context of this story, and within the growth of Jody as a character, he doesn't matter. While he interacts with our lead throughout the story, there is no meaningful connection between him and Jody. So when she shows no love towards him once he dies, it is treated like a throwaway moment. Yes, he is supposed to be the father figure for Jody, but no care was given by Cage in establishing their relationship, and most of their interactions were exposition dumps. And once he dies and goes away, Jody acts like she never knew him at all. He's just another stepping stone to her main goal. It's a really weird disconnect that pulled me out of the experience. So the shock of Nathan pulling the trigger on himself feels like another poor attempt at drama, and is a flagrant tone-deaf approach to suicide, which you can imagine is very irresponsible. But this isn't the only moment where this game has this glorification of death and self-harm. Swinging back to the homeless section again, if you explore the area you will find a knife stuck in a tyre, and without any prior warning, you are given the option to cut Jody's wrists, or you have another option to jump off the balcony. Now, in a game that touts itself as a mature story, where our choices matter, who would do this? What is the outcome if you do it? And why is this a thing in the first place? Because when it comes to games for the most part, we don't want them to come to harm. So given the option out the blue to do harm to Jody feels weird and goes against every instinct you ever had playing a video game. And also, when it comes to jumping off this balcony, if you do decide to jump, Aiden saves her. And then, all she does is complain about life on the run, and the predicament she put herself in the first place. And once again, this bleeds into her character because she is invincible. So why would she do this? Which doesn't help with our homeless friend here. Instead of rushing to her aid and talking to her like a human being, a girl who almost jumped to her death in front of him and now is having an emotional breakdown, he just says, yeah, that's okay, let's go grab some pork and beans. Maybe it'll cheer you up. And it's just another massive disconnect. Once again, this whole scene was made for hollow emotional manipulation, and it's implemented so casually. It gives me the impression that the writer either thought it was an acceptable plot device, or didn't care about these traumatic events and the victims of these acts. And the way these options are just given to you out of the blue makes my skin crawl. It's almost insidious in its execution. The same can be said with the actual ending, where Jody can either choose life or choose to die, and be rewarded with, you know what, just watch this.
There's a world out here. A whole universe of forests and lakes and mountains and rivers. It's all around us. You just have to listen carefully to hear its whisper. Neither heaven nor hell. There's no God or devil. Just a place where we continue to exist after we die. My soul explores it endlessly, and I've still only seen a fragment of it.
Isn't it funny that David Cage's version of the afterlife is so indecisive? But that doesn't take away that once again, this is a glorification of death that contradicts everything we know of Jody as a character. If she was so hell-bent on killing herself, why show all of this hard living throughout the whole game? You know, beating up hundreds of dudes, defying death, saving people. It doesn't add up. Also in this bit, you get to meet up with all the side characters that can die throughout the game, which is okay, cool, but once again, and I keep saying this and I do apologise, none of this matters, as they have no bearing on the narrative, and the only reason why you would frag them is to get a fucking PlayStation trophy. Yeah, hey, good job Tommy Titwank69, here's a lump of silver to shove up your ass. What the fuck? Sadly, the optics of this entire story go from bad to incredibly difficult to talk about, and this is where our good pal David violates one of the biggest rules in writing, and that is, if you can use anything but rape as a plot device, don't use rape. I don't think I need to say this, but sexual assault is one of those sensitive topics that is complex and painful for the people who have experienced it, and Cage is not prepared to talk about this nuanced topic, and it shows, as it's just another example of his provocative use of themes that are used as another hurdle for Jody to overcome. Also, it's kind of pathetic that he thinks this is acceptable to talk about, full stop. And what makes this sequence irredeemable in my eyes is that it's optional. However, the game does not tell you this. There is a scene in the middle of this game where Jody wants to meet some friends at a local bar, and it turns out her buddies are running late, so she decides to sit down and wait for them to show up. The bartender comes over and gives Jody a drink, and at this point you can stand up and walk right out the front door and skip this scene entirely. Where this sequence becomes hard to experience is that all the foreshadowing of something that is about to happen is here, but the structure and execution are like the rest of this game, sloppy. There are no prompts to tell the player they have the freedom to leave, and also that you have Aiden here to help, who you can use to eavesdrop on the men at the bar. And if you do this, then you know right away there's a bad vibe here. But you might be under the impression that he is currently away from Jody, as she used him in an earlier scene to mind trick a character called Cole to sneak out of the lab and go to this bar. And on the way to this said bar, she sends him off into the forest. Even with the established mechanic early on that Aiden can't be too far away from Jody for very long because it causes her harm, there are no side effects here to denote to the player that he is here to help in this scene. So if you don't pick up on this fact, then you might be caught unaware. So yes, the game and its creators have failed to do their jobs and inform the player of what is about to happen. And when the incident happens, there is a sharp cutaway from Jody, and Aiden then swoops in to defend her by brutally murdering these creeps. Which is, yeah, okay, fair enough, these guys are assholes and he deserve to die. And while you don't see anything untoward, the implication is enough to know that this is in very bad taste. Once again, David Cage does not want to go any deeper into this, which to me is a huge misunderstanding of the situation at hand and a frankly disgusting and cowardly use of extremely sensitive subjects to push his narrative forward. This is like shitty writer trope 101, and what further compounds this twisted messaging is that the game on a mechanical level post this scene will punish the player by locking out trophies and sizable chunks of content. Arguably, this incident that isn't your fault is the biggest fail state in this entire game. Now, I know I keep repeating myself, but what does that say? What is the message here? That victims of sexual assault can no longer find happiness? That people through appropriate means of healing can't progress in life? It leads a lot of questions here that are never filled in or never attempted to answer. While I don't think this was the intended meaning, and I hope that Cage has a shred of decency and didn't go into this with the purpose of expressing this message, but it doesn't excuse his blatant use of deeply hurtful situations as a character device, and is a dullard to spring this onto an unsuspecting player base that may have been affected by this violent act in real life. This isn't like chainsawing aliens on a galaxy far, far away. Topics such as this cause deep wounds that can affect the victims and their loved ones for a very long time. And for Cage to charge in and use this as a shallow attempt to get you to connect with his character is fucking disgusting. So yeah, it's easy to see that this is a bad look for all involved, and I don't want to dwell on this any further. So out of respect to the people who may have been affected by this, I think we should move on. Chapter 8, Tone Deaf.
Where do you get, this is the story of a 15 years of a girl. I mean, you know, where do you sort of get your material from to get into her head? Because obviously you're not a 15-year-old girl yourself.
Well, you know,
apparently.
when you write, you put a lot of yourself in, of course, in the characters that you describe. For me, in my career as a writer, there was a big turning point. It was probably Heavy Rain. It was the first game on which I discovered that I could write something about me and my experience and my feelings rather than talking about, you know, aliens and monsters and other planets. I could just talk about people and in real life and their emotions and things that I experienced myself. So Heavy Rain was really about my experience being a young father. Beyond is another experience that was more painful. It's I lost someone I felt really close to in my family, and it was the first time I was confronted with death in such a way, and it's something very brutal, and all people who've been confronted with death know what I'm talking about. It's something really brutal, really sudden, and 1 second the person is there and she has feelings and emotion and memories and all that stuff that you share, and from 1 second to another, all this is gone. And there's nothing left, and it's always weird, and you can't help thinking, where is this person now? Where are these feelings? Where are these emotions? Where are these memories now? And as I never trusted exactly what religion had to say about death and what's on the other side, I just tried to make up my own idea, my own vision of what happens after we die.
While I agree that David Cage was coming from a personal perspective when he approached the story, and look, I believe the best fiction comes from a shred of truth, the biggest problem with this whole story is the writer himself. Even with a stripped back cast and this focus on having an action-packed story with an emotional edge, it's still, just like the rest of his back catalogue, vapid and unfocused. The usual start, middle and end structure is replaced by a non-linear setup that is messy and incomprehensible, with arcs that go nowhere or used to get a cheap emotional heat. The cast, while great performers in their own right, are underutilised and come off as another maypole to advertise this game. And the real shit that DC wants to hit us with is gutless and buried under so many conflicting tones that when it's time to get real, it often comes up as another baseless complaint, rather than something that he is passionate in talking about, or mishandled in such a way that the original intent is lost. The one aspect that kind of shocked me while researching this game was the culture and the consensus of the people who played it, especially when it first launched back in 2013. Usually at this point in the video, I would say that cop-out line that, if you like this game then all the power to you, but this time I had to know why. So I went onto the website where lateral thought is a sin, Metacritic, and I was shocked to see that people loved this game. However, this 10 out of 10 review made by Ozone, Aussie One, whatever, made me laugh at this opening line.
Simply put, not a game for the masses. I would hope everyone out there would be touched by its message. But, as a senior player, I know better.
A senior player. A player that is senior.
My brain hurts!
And while it would be fun to riff on these diatribes, I think the comment left on my Fahrenheit video by the user called Cheeky Panda, nice, pretty much hit the nail on the head, because if we compare the scores with the PS4 and PC releases that came out 5 years later, you can tell that the people who were ride or die for this game back in the day seem to have moved on since then. And honestly, most of the comments I saw, especially at that time, were people thirsting over Elliot Page. And I wonder if those people are still in that mindset in light of recent news. And I think that sums up Beyond Tone Deaf nicely. It was a story that may have had good intentions at the start, with the budget to present it in a visually attractive way, is held back by David Cage's aggressive incompetence to tell a story that makes any kind of sense, and it's bogged down by its mind-numbing length, with scenes and set pieces that go nowhere, with moments where delicate topics are even glossed over or framed to be a tasteless display. So, the final question in this video that needs addressing is, what narrative has David Cage done to make his games more mature, to be taken seriously as an art form, and to explore adult-oriented themes progressively? Fuck if I know. All he did in his 11-hour diatribe is further expose himself as a baseless provocateur, with a cast he probably blackmailed to be in this mess. Nothing profound or engaging was said, and the messages I did pick up, I want to banish from my memory as soon as possible. And what makes this even more cynical, this is being pushed by one of the biggest tech corporations, which only cares for profits over quality products. Even after buying this game from a shady key site, because the enemy of my enemy is also a rip-off merchant, I feel dirty playing this game. And I feel dirty for spending money on this shit, even with the smug posturing of not lining DC's greasy mitts. With that said, if I gave numeric ratings for games I reviewed to reflect my overall enjoyment level, and taking into account the toothpicks of things I did like, this would be the first 0 out of 10 in nearly a decade of reviewing games as a hobby. I have never seen something this inept. And in the last video, I know I labelled Heavy Rain as the worst game I've ever played. I was too naive. I was too presumptuous. On reflection, Heavy Rain is a fucking masterpiece in comparison. While it did suffer from sloppy writing that didn't go anywhere for most of its runtime, it had charm. It had a decent presentation and it had a vision. With Beyond Two Souls, the game itself is just a large gelatinous grey cube of bland platitudes and pseudo-deep crap that wanted to push the narrative design of the medium, but ironically may have stalled any progress that was made before its release, especially in the mainstream. For a title that promises to be a saviour of storytelling in games, it pales in comparison to examples that came out a decade before, on less powerful tech. And the worst thing is, the further I move away from this, the less I remember. It's like my brain is doing everything it can to erase this junk from my noggin. And to let you in on a secret, this fucking script took nearly a month to write, because every time I went back and watched clips just to refresh my memory, I found more stuff I had to pull apart. This whole game is like a piñata of terrible ideas. That is why Beyond Two Souls gets a big, fat goose egg. It has no right to exist, and it's baffling that people think that this cancer-encoding form has any right to your financial or emotional investment. And its messages that are here, not because of authorial intent, but by accident, is a testament to a writer and his hack approach to everything. I know this is cliche to say, but this is one of the worst stories in gaming. No, fuck that shit. It's one of the worst in all of fiction. And I find it so ironic that David Cage wants his stories to be mature, but he chooses to write these concepts in such a juvenile manner. It's all melodrama, it's masturbatory, and the use of miserable events to make you relate to his characters that have no character, or act in a way that could have been easily avoided if the creators around this project gave a shit about the subtleties, which they don't. And while I felt for the team that works with Cage to produce this shit, the further I went into this abysmal abyss, my empathy for them quickly diminished. Is David Cage that much of a tyrant that none of his peers turn around to him and say no when he comes up with a really fucking dumb idea? If that is the case, I urge you to get out, because that environment will produce nothing that's worth a damn. Especially with a creator at the centre of this team who thinks he is creating high art, but makes content that puts YouTube Red movies to shame. And to the industry shills and players and influencers who put out reviews endorsing this shit, are just as complacent. The bottom line here is David Cage is a bad and thoughtless writer who tries to wriggle off the hook by saying that his stories have no outward thoughtful messages that the player should take seriously in his games, while saying that his stories are trying to push the envelope in mature storytelling and should resonate with people who play it, while not grasping the fact that this stance is a convoluted conundrum that he made himself and is too stupid to write himself out of it. So, from my perspective, he should just give up. Hello, and welcome to the Game Asylum. In this cesspool of madness I call a video game review show, we have been taking a look at the wonderful, eclectic, and spellbinding series of interactive films made by the polarizing personality David Cage. Okay, that previous statement has more underlying salt than the English Channel, and if you've watched this 4-video series so far, you know this has been a head-splitting exploration into the mind of an auteur creator, which has been... Detroit Become Human is a sci-fi themed thriller released in 2018 on the PlayStation 4, and is the 5th game produced by Quantic Dream. And as you may already be aware, the last 2 games I took a look at in this series were, without hyperbole, the worst games I've ever played. Yet, like a moth to a flame, I find myself fascinated by Quantic Dream's work. And while this series was born to riff on the silliness of these games, and the lead creator's stunning incompetence, David Cage and his team do come up with a few great ideas that could be interesting concepts if done right. Yes, if you've been following me on this journey, you probably already have a good idea how this following video will play out. But stick around, because this one took me to places I never thought I would go when reviewing an interactive whatever the fuck these games are. Made by a creative with the self-awareness of a breeze block with Uwe Boll's face sellotape to it. Also, thanks for sticking around, it's been quite the ride. So let's start off this very long video with the bottom line. Yes, I know I am stealing this from Tim Rogers of Action Button.
Hello.
Detroit Become Human is the best David Cage game David Cage has ever made, which sounds like a ringing endorsement, and it is and it's not at the same time. You could say it's complicated. While I enjoyed most of what this game had to offer, and in some areas it's damn right inspired, it's still full of the dumb bollocks that you would expect from our favourite auteur. And yes, I'm using the word favourite in 18-foot high sarcasm quotes. Yet I can honestly say that Detroit is the most consistent game in terms of tone made by Quantic Dream. But once again, that is a loaded statement, because this consistency is a nice tender hot dog in a bear trap. And while you want to grab it and taste its meaty goodness, you might lose your hand in the process. And I know I'm using a food analogy in a game review, very hack, get over it. Detroit Become Human takes place in 2038, where mankind has evolved to rely on androids to assist them in their everyday lives. In this alternative version of the Motor City, this uprising of robotic servants, created by the megacorp Cyberlife, cause various social-political issues that are so trite in their metaphorical context, they might as well be a Watch Mojo video. And yes, additionally, in this universe you can have sex with a robot, just so you know. We wouldn't want to ignore the gross horniness of our writer, would we? He's probably rubbing one out right now, and that's a mental picture I just put in my head that I'm not proud of. Ugh. In this story, we follow 3 of these said androids, such as the rogue android hunter Connor, who is a prototype synthetic under the supervision of Lieutenant Hank Anderson, who, if you haven't guessed already, is a hard-boiled drunkard detective, who is of course borderline suicidal. I would say drink a shot because it's DC using another cliche and suicide to pad out his story rather than using a original idea, but it's a little inappropriate this time. The next character is a domestic servant called Kara, who's in charge of caring for a girl called Alice. The kicker here is that Kara has just come back from the repair shop as her owner, Todd, brutally beat her to death. So yeah, themes of domestic abuse. I guess David is typing with one hand again. Also, I love that they used the same skin for Todd that they used in Beyond Two Souls, in the scene where Jody gets sexually assaulted. Stay classy, Quantic Dream, stay classy. And the third wheel we have Marcus, another Domestobot, looking after famous painter Carl Manfred, played by Lance Henriksen. And in all honesty, they have quite the wholesome relationship, where Carl tries to stir up emotions in Mark by painting pictures and discussing philosophy, which as you can guess in this world is very, very bad. However, I do find it amusing that DC has finally admitted defeat in trying to insert emotion into mindless, soulless humans, and now is trying to crowbar emotions into actual robots. But making a joke about it is such low-hanging fruit, it's below sea level. And I will say that the opening with Connor, where you have to investigate what is going on and then save the girl, is one of the strongest in the Cageography. While the structure of this storytelling is in the same style as Heavy Rain, where we flip from one character to another as they progress through their own story, unlike the former, Detroit's scene-to-scene flow is tolerable. This smoothness is mostly attributed to David Cage not being the only writer this time, After being moved by the, quote, gripping story of Beyond Two Souls, it inspired UK TV writer Adam Williams to reach out to Cage to help write his future stories. The problem I had during my research is that there seems to be some confusion on what he actually did on this project, and his role in this said project. In interviews, he is billed as the lead writer. However, on the wiki, he is a supplementary writer, and then in the credits of the game, he is credited as a secondary scribbler. So trying to nail down what he actually did and what he worked on before Detroit was a fruitless endeavour, unfortunately. Unless he's a time-travelling Hollywood actor from the 1960s, and yeah, maybe not. I honestly don't think Quantic Dream has the tech to make a time machine. They can barely write a coherent story. While he may be a pain in the ass to Google search, his influence on this story is immediately noticeable. While the overall plot and script is still a very David Cage affair, the cringe and offbeat delivery that taints his previous work is greatly reduced. Remember the Kojima filter from the last video? This is what I'm talking about. Well, the filter in question is more like a wet piece of toilet paper, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. A great vertical slice of this improvement is the relationship between Carl and Marcus. Yes, the prose being spoken is still flowery. You can't wash out all those stains, but you can tell that these characters had a relationship before the events of this game. It has a lived-in feel that most stories never attempt to grasp, let alone intentionally try to get you, the player, to notice. Contrast this with the relationship between Jody and the mannequin of William Dafoe in Beyond Two Shits. They try everything they can to make you buy into this relationship between the two, but ultimately it just ends up being a boring sigh when Dafoe finally dies. This is mostly due to DC employing Hollywood caliber actors, but instead of giving them decent fucking stuff to work on, he just coasted on this as a unique selling point. It's like trying to employ a porn actor and not asking them to do, you know what I mean. So when I was introduced to these characters, and Hank and Connor I have to add, I fell for their charming demeanours, and I was pleasantly surprised. It was actually a lot of fun to be around these characters. What is this? Am I connecting to characters in a David Cage game? Damn. I guess I am the Tin Man trying to find my heart. Do you get it? It's an Alice in Wonderland reference. And yes, this is a joke about DC's lack of subtlety. And yes, he drops this nugget that you're seeing here, which is so on the nose, my future unborn children will need rhinoplasty. We're off to see the wizard of really shit stories. Oh, I can't be arsed with this joke. Let's move on.
Cringe. There's no other word for it. This makes me cringe. It's embarrassing.
Even with this smooth flow to the story, in comparison to Quantic's previous output, I still can't shake off this feeling that there's an air of overcompensation running throughout this story. Instead of making a tight, compacted narrative full of large and small moments, this triad of characters is shoved into paths that are structurally bloated, and this, quote, hot seat style of bouncing from one avatar to another can cause, especially to me, this immersion whiplash. Not enough to cause me to lose interest, however, yet just enough to make me mildly annoyed while playing. Let me explain. The tension and the intrigue are rising to a boiling point, building that hype for a satisfying release, and then you are rudely kicked out to another character, and that intriguing hook is never addressed. Or, by the time you take control of that character again, the momentum of the previous scene is gone. And that's not even getting into the tangential crossroads when these characters actually meet, which could be described as token at best and utter pointless at its worst. While this multi-character approach to storytelling has been attempted by Cage multiple times, and arguably it's the best it's ever been, it's still a pale comparison to his cinematic influences. This 50-50 structure, where all the characters get their shit in at the same time, does hurt the pace of the overall narrative. Let me give you a visual of how this feels. Now, I would just love to call the overall story arc bad and move on to the next subject, but that would pass on some of the best moments in Detroit that are buried under all this tripe. So, if we're going to experience these moments in a better way, how can we theoretically change the structure of this story to make these small yet memorable moments stick out better? Maybe if we edit this to be an episodic format, then perhaps these little story beats would be easier to digest. The problem here is that without any programming know-how and not knowing how to call your engine with a rasterizer or whatever the shit that means, how can we test this theory? Especially if I can't reverse engineer the code like a cool cyberpunk hacker, or some twat with reflective shades on, whatever. When I was thinking how we can test this theory out, I thought perhaps I could use my scrub level expertise in video editing to make a rough cut, linear film of each character's story, circumventing the hot swapping, jumping around mess that the original story has. As I already have the clips from all my capture sessions, I can just throw them all together and boom, there you go. However, that sounds like a lot of work, and my videos take forever to make as it is, until it dawned upon me that people have already done this type of cut and posted them on this very website. Nice. So I blocked off a day to watch these edited linear cuts that focused on a singular character, and taking into account a handful of continuity errors, I felt like I had a better grasp over what is going on, rather than the mosh pit that Cage likes to structure his stories in. This leads to another question. Why do we have to consume these stories in such a convoluted manner? Why does DC try to do this portmanteau round-robin story structure that only a few creators attempt to begin with? What is his end goal in trying to do this style? Well, it's because David Cage is extra. 2,000-page scripts, needless complexity, and innate celebrity-laden casts is here to pump up the content, in a vain attempt to add production value. This obsession with excess, while not inherently bad, can lead to a minefield of problems, such as plot holes, contradictions, and various other writing fallacies. Yes, the hand of Alan Williams on this project is a much needed filter, and it makes the entertaining moments stand out a lot more than before. And while this emphasis on excess is great on the technical side of the production value, and we will dry hump that stuff later, this notion of legitimacy by blacking out the sun with a landslide of narrative tidbits is a lot to take in, especially if you want to consume Detroit Become Human more than once, because most of this stuff you don't really see on a first playthrough. If you just enjoy it at a surface level, then the story will feel a lot more easier to read. It's just when you play the game multiple times, this isn't the case. And guess what? I've played this game 5 times now. And while this line of questioning is edging closer to rhetorical shitposting, I think it's better to ask a more relevant question. What makes the bloviating in Detroit different from the other games? Well, in my own view, the answer is twofold. 1, the general writing has improved, not sure if that is due to the new filter or just by dumb luck, and the second is the use of science fiction to frame these narrative topics. Oh yeah, we're going to talk about some nerd shit that I love, and I'm not sorry. Out of all types of fictional storytelling, sci-fi has the broadest spectrum. It's a perfect what-if sandbox where you can borrow aspects of real life and play them out on a grander, more technologically advanced scale. Star Trek The Next Generation is a perfect encapsulation of this sandbox in action. Most of the stories are based around the crew, and their own social struggles that happen in each episode. What makes this show addictive to me is the personable nature of these characters. Yes, it's set on a spaceship in the far future where humans have evolved to overcome their petty squabbles, and of course make contact with various other intelligent life forms. It's still grounded in reality. Sure, it's a magical reality where wacky shit happens, but the interactions between all the characters are mostly natural, apart from Riker, who is the biggest sex offender in the galaxy. Another thing I love about TNG is that it isn't scared to show you some grim shit at times, such as the planet full of junkies, or to be more relevant for this video, the one where Data, who is an android, went behind his superiors to create his own android child, which leads to a very dismayed Captain Picard to question what it means to be alive. Like, life is toothpaste that can't be put back into its tube, etc, prime directive, blah blah bollocks. Yet, within 45 minutes of this episode, We are put on a journey of life and death with characters that shouldn't have any emotional weight due to them being essentially computers with legs, to this moral tug of war of what it means to be human, what it means to have sentience regardless of the being. It's easily one of my favourite episodes of a show that is packed full of great moments such as this. Maybe I'll talk about it more one day. Also, on a Star Trek gaming side note, I'm now a proud owner of a copy of Star Trek Legacy. And of course the 2013 movie tie-in where they changed the entire mythos of the franchise and turned it into a third-person shooter. Yikes. With all that said, and getting back on the topic, I find it ironic that Quantic Dream took these ideas and somehow couldn't do them justice, even with 10 times the length. With Cage setting this story in the near future, he is trying to play with that previously mentioned sandbox, while at the same time trying to ground the world in reality that is not too far from our own. So in a way, he has created this wiggle room where he can go a little silly with his concepts, and this is where a majority of my enjoyment for Detroit came from. One scene in particular is where Kara and Alice find this creepy looking mansion in the middle of nowhere, owned by this charming fella. As you can probably guess, instead he tries to wipe Kara's mind and turn her into a twisted abomination, just like the numerous others of her kind imprisoned in this house, and this level is capped off by the creator of these android zombies being beaten to death by his own creations. Now, does this story have anything to do with the overall narrative? No. Will it have lasting effects on the characters involved? No. In fact, nothing in this scene has any bearing on the story apart from this small arc, which should be a big gaping hole in this story, and yes, it is, but I can't help but love it. If you've watched my channel for any length of time, you know I have a soft spot for schlocky horror games from the PS1/PS2 era. So this is my bias talking here, but my imagination ran wild with this idea. I want an entire game based on this. No, I want an entire series where Kara navigates through multiple regal buildings, dodging mutilated sex dolls like a hentai version of Clock Tower mixed with Five Nights at Freddy's. Indie devs, get on that. And that's not even it. So many snippets of interesting ideas that are crammed into this proverbial dish could benefit so much for being allowed to breathe. And that being said, I find it funny that the structure of how the story is told is far more interesting than the story itself. And I would make a dumb segue joke here, but you know what we're about to talk about. To dampen this carpet bombing of exposition, I'm just going to cut to the chase and talk about the overarching theme of this story. Then we can go into the more granular stuff later on, because there is a French auteur in the room that wants to say something big, not too big however, just vaguely imply something, and then run away from the backlash, like some troll on Twitter. And as video game enjoyers, this next subject we absolutely adore, and that subject is politics. And I can already picture a Call of Duty commentator cringe in his seat just hearing that word. Yes, my mind hasn't evolved since 2013. Sorry, I'm stalling again. While I couldn't give a flying rope of Bill Clinton's bodily fluid for politics, and this isn't the platform to express your garbage opinions either, DC and his team have decided to move away from the philosophical screed of what happens when you die in Beyond Two Souls, to what happens when your iPhone gets bored of you looking at weeb filth and decides to pick up a brick and fight the establishment. Not sure how your phone would do that, but stay with me on this. In an interview with the gaming website Game Reactor, Adam Williams explains why him, Cage, and Quantic Dream wanted to talk about not a specific social issue, but rather a universal theme of a divided society between humans and androids.
In imagining the story, we wanted to explore universal themes that repeated themselves throughout societies, and one of those is the relationship between those who have power and those who do not have power. And that's the relationship between humans and androids. Humans and androids.
What?
We didn't have a specific issue in mind, whether it's racism or sexism or whatever it is. We wanted to explore the universal theme of a divided society and let the player bring their own specific context to the story, which is going to help them write their own story to the choices they make.
While I get why they wanted to talk about civil rights without the baggage of the real life context, I can't shake off this feeling that Cage and Williams wanted to co-opt this hot button topic and then strip it of this metaphorical context, to then follow up with this low bore message of bland platitudes. But then I can see the other hand, where this is a standalone universe steeped in verisimilitude. That what if sandbox we mentioned earlier can be used to run an alternative scenario where the prejudice of the human race is united by its hatred for androids. I will say at least the writing slips you into this gradually rather than making a hard right turn, like in Cage's previous attempts. It's not subtle, but it's enough to make you feel that there's a natural After breaking his programming in a visual way, Marcus gets into a fight with Carl's druggy son, who then gets shot up by the cops and dumped in what can only be described as robot hell. And while in this pit, he has to salvage parts from his fallen brethren in order to climb out of the mire to become a very blatant Jesus allegory. Anyway, while walking through the valley of the shadow of death, he is told by one of his busted buddies to go to Jericho, a bastion for recently self-aware androids, and by the power of his Gary Stewness, Marcus becomes the leader. No, that's a wrong word. He becomes the saviour of this ragtag group, who then hatch a plan to raid various Cyberlife facilities for delicious lug nuts, weapons, and other mechanical comrades that Marcus can convert to their cause, because he's the chosen one in a David Cage script. However, this is where the plot starts to get very interesting. But just like the game and its story structure, let's jump to another character. After his sizzling opening where he has to negotiate with a rogue replicant, Connor is partnered with Lieutenant Hank Anderson, played by Clancy Brown, and their job is to investigate these incidents where androids are going nutty. Basically, it's the Norman Jayden gameplay from Heavy Rain given a cyberpunk coat of paint. And yes, the gameplay here is shallow in terms of working out what happened, but I am a sucker for TV police procedurals and games where you have to use your wits to solve crimes. Yeah, this isn't LA Noire, but I would love to have a full game in this style, with some added complexity. But I will say it's flashy enough to distract you from its lack of depth, like a set of keys being jiggled in front of a baby. And going back to the subject of David Cage being extra, of course there is a ton of ideas, like we mentioned earlier, have been tossed into this dumpster fire. Ideas that, with some time and some effort, could have been really cool concepts on their own. Such as during the investigations with Hank and Connor, there is another intriguing piece of world building. In quite like these areas where you see rogue androids, you'll notice the term RA9 scratched into the walls. You see, RA9 is a kind of godlike figure for these recently sentient androids. And it piqued my interest because, yeah, you would think as soon as they are self-aware, they would also think about their existence post them being alive. And it's always that quandary, what will happen when you die? So logically, you could see that happening. You could see that they're trying to find a higher being to give them some comfort. However, it's another plot line that's tossed into the burning dumpster and is dumped as quickly as it's established because, like I said previously, David Cage is extra. He will throw this at you, but actually give you anything to chew on? No. Anyway, throughout this deep dive, I have been secretly obsessed with the progression of the technology that is used to create these games. Sure, it took a while to hit the balance between photorealism and artistic expression, like I mentioned in the Heavy Rain review. Detroit has a style that I really fuck with, and the motion capture especially is a perfect yardstick of this progression. While full body motion capture is nothing new in games or movies, the combination of that as well as facial and performance capture at the same time brings a new level of believability that wasn't even possible just a few years ago. This is not just a bunch of chumps parading a bukkake level of balls on their bonds. This is a full body performance. When I highlighted this problem in Heavy Rain, where we compared the audition footage to the final product, you could see for yourself there was a wild disconnect between the performance from the actor themselves and then the performance in the booth, because the scenes such as this sounded so flat in comparison to their physical performances. So you have this gulf of realistic looking characters acting unnaturally, or sounding unnaturally. Saying that, let's talk about the cast. While Cage had his watershed moment when he got two big names in that game, one I was stoked to see was Jesse Williams, who played Marcus. But he has one of those faces that just bugs the hell out of you because you've seen him before but you don't know where. You know, you do that Leo DiCaprio pointing at a TV meme thing when you see them. And through my multiple playthroughs of Detroit, I had that feeling. I know I've seen him before, but I couldn't place my finger on what. So I finally caved in and checked IMDb, and realised he was in the 2011 horror movie The Cabin in the Woods. Yes, it's a Joss Whedon film, with that annoying cool and witty dialogue that makes me eternally cringe to the point my rectum starts to bleed. With that said, it's one of the best 80s inspired slasher movies starring middle-aged actors playing teenagers I have ever seen. Another standout performance is Brian DeChart, who plays Connor, who seems to be prolific in recent times, with starring roles like Brendan the Vending Machine in Cyberpunk 2077.
Who's that girl you were talking to?
Oh, you mean Theo? She's my bestest friend. Gosh, she's so nice, and pretty, and sensitive. I like talking to her. Definitely way more fun than pumping out caramel lattes.
He also has a Twitch and YouTube channel, and just seems to be an all-round wholesome dude. Also, on a side note, DeChart and Brown's interactions in Detroit Become Human were apparently improvised, so these standout performances that we see throughout the game are down to their chemistry rather than the script. And the third main actor in this cast is Valerie Curry, who plays the role of Kara. What I found interesting is that she has a long history with Quantic Dream, as she starred in a tech demo called Kara in 2011, which is the basis of what we would later see in Detroit. In fact, this is what got me interested in Quantic Dream back in the day. Not enough to play their games, mind you, but I am a self-proclaimed cyberpunk tart, so anything with that look will have my attention. And also, and ironically, this short is the best thing Quantic Dream has ever made. It's short, it's sweet, and it hits you hard, and it's definitely worth checking out if you haven't before. And while I find Curry's performance in Detroit to be captivating, unfortunately they kinda use her as an afterthought rather than a solid third column of the story. Sure, she has some B-movie scenes, as I mentioned earlier, which are great, but in hindsight, it seems that she was casted for token notoriety over her abilities as an actress, and her overall plotline, compared to Robot Jesus and Connor, is the quote cagiest plot of this story. In less words, it says nothing, tries to get you engaged by hefty doses of misery porn, and ultimately is meaningless in the grand arc of the narrative. I would complain, but I am more astounded by the consistency. And I'll give an honourable mention to Minka Kelly, who plays the bloodthirsty right-hand woman of Marcus called North. The reason why is because she was in a TV show in 2014 called Almost Human, where a hard-boiled detective, played by Carl Urban, teams up with an android to solve crimes. Are you seeing a resemblance here? I'm not saying that Cage was cribbing, but the similarities between this show and the development of his hot new game, which was being made at the same time I might add, are uncanny. And after the 4th episode, for me, I was losing interest. But I find it odd that the story beats in the show coincidentally end up in Detroit. I'm not insinuating anything, but yeah, it's a bit greasy here, let's be honest. Once Marcus takes over Jericho, you are given the choice to peacefully protest for droid rights, or push this agenda by violence. Yup, at first I sighed at playing another game with a binary morality system, where you choose either sunshine and flowers, or be a baby-eating maniac. Actually, in a refreshing break from the norm, your choices from this point onward do have weight in this world. Sure, the people who are affected by Mark's decisions are not critical to the story, and most of the effect of this world is told to you rather than shown. I will give Cage credit for having a diverse platter of choices, and these choices, unlike the other games in the Cageography, are now easy to track by the use of, quite boringly, flowcharts, which did prompt me to play the game multiple times. Granted, most of these choices are not worth commenting on, but they added just enough interesting ideas to be worth going back and playing. That is why I couldn't say earlier that the story is crap, because these side stories are the most interesting part of the game. And yes, another tangent is approaching, and I'm not sorry. Later on in Connor and Hank's investigation, our detectives are called to attend another murder, this time at a brothel. It seems that our cadaver was getting a bit too rough with one of the working girls, which leads to our detectives searching for this killer. It turns out that this android is in love with another android, and they were fed up with being abused by these creeps and decided to run away. After a fight scene with our protagonists, and losing my lunch due to the motion sickness brought on by the shaky cam, Connor corners the couple, and then you have the choice to spare them or shoot the perp, causing the other one to break down. And once again, in isolation, this is a great one-shot idea of an android couple stuck in a horrible existence who want to be free. And the conundrum of what is morally right or wrong is set in this grey area, where no matter the intentions of these characters, they all have metaphorical blood on their hands. Okay, it's still that patented misery porn that Cage seems to have a burning desire to express at any given moment, but in this instance, it's at least interesting and tonally matching. And it goes beyond this absolute surface level that we have been spoon-fed throughout the entire game. Also, I can't hear the sounds of enthusiastic faps, while a real emotional moment graces us with its presence. Or it's a sound I've heard so often by now, it's become white noise, I'm not sure anymore. Which sadly can't be said when it comes to the gameplay, which, let's be honest here, hasn't changed in nearly a decade. And yes, I have mentioned this before, that the gameplay is as complex as pushing a play button on a media player's remote control. I think it's now appropriate to really go in on the gameplay itself and talk about the link between this and the visual and audio feedback. To give the gameplay some praise, Detroit and the other examples of this style are an evolution of the classic adventure game formula. While this evolution doesn't suffer from the infamous moon logic puzzle difficulty the genre is known for, you can see a direct link to what Quantic Dream are doing now and what was done, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Where this gameplay differs is the emphasis of pushing a random selection of controller inputs to progress this said story, and is the bare minimum in terms of intrinsic feedback. You could also say that this approach to the gameplay is an attempt to slide these interactive films into the DMs of a medium that's over 40 years old. That medium, of course, is video games, which is apparently still in its infancy in terms of telling meaningful emotional stories. While I personally disagree with that statement, let's run with it here. Something that did surprise me while making these reviews was the sheer number of people admitting that these games did affect them in an emotional level, especially in their teenage years. And now with the hindsight and the emotional normalization of adulthood, they see these games for what they really are. Which leads me to assume that Cage made games over making films was because he knew that this hack approach wouldn't get him any traction in that medium. So, in a way, you could say that David Cage might be self-aware of his presence in the gaming space. Sure, like I said, I'm going to give him his flowers and say his team is a pioneer of this genre, but they are far from the best. And all it takes is for another studio to make a competent game in this style to make his entire back catalogue irrelevant. Arguably, that has already been done before and after his games came out. And these examples, flashing on the screen, were made by teams who use video games to their full potential while telling a mature story. So taking that all into account, this borderline meaningless control of your characters in Cage games are used as a crutch to lazily progress a story by giving us, the player, a half-rotten carrot on a stick to continue playing these games. Couple this with dizzying action scenes where the editor breaks the 180-degree rule of action of keeping everyone in frame so it's easy to track what's going on, which is ironic because their first interactive drama, Fahrenheit, actually did this really well, leads to the most important part of a video game, the gameplay, to be a passive endeavour. So now shit on that, let's talk about the story again. And I know I keep making this joke, but hey, it's the best joke we've got right now, apart from the game, obviously. Detroit Become Human, from a narrative perspective, is a perfect example of the journey being far more entertaining than the destination. And while this journey flies off into multiple tangents, both good and bad, at least stuff happens with a purpose, no matter how insignificant. For my multiple playthroughs of Detroit, I decided to do a single run of going down both the main paths, and then a few playthroughs where I did a mix-up between the peaceful and violent choices. Your choices will also influence the mood of Mark's collaborators. If you choose Force, you acquire the love of North, who comes off as a psychopath at worst and a psychopath at best, and Josh, who loves it when you use a velvet glove approach, but all he really does is whine and complain, or sound like he's whining even when he isn't. To cut to the chase, Josh sucks. Well, if we're being brutal, both of them are redundant. These moral anchors for Marcus to tie himself to are like pouring a glass of water into another glass of water, which is also my opinion of the choices that you make that are not binary. So I think it's best if we change gears and talk about the social political commentary inside Detroit Become Human. And yes, those sarcasm quotes are working overtime today. I can give Cage a tiny crumb of credit for trying to tackle a real world subject. The problem here is the last person I would give the microphone to say some real shit about a topic that I can barely comprehend myself would be David Cage. And while Adam Williams and David Cage try to detach the baggage of real life oppression of people of colour by commenting on the themes rather than the racism, is a form of pseudo-intellectualism. This blatant attempt to strip away the metaphor in a story where a race of androids is being treated with utter disdain is a logical leap that is taller than the ivory tower the creator of this said story inhabits. And I know I'm blending fiction with reality here, but this idealism, or whatever David Cage is trying to imply, is poorly thought out, and the stupidity on display is mesmerizing. When Marcus chooses to rise up and rally his android comrades, you have the ability to choose an icon to represent this new movement, and one in particular made my jaw drop. Yeah. Now, back when this game was being developed, and during its release, the Black Lives Matter movement was in remission. So, while it's still co-opting a logo of a real social movement, and that is still gross, I can see why they wanted to use this logo, and through the filter of verisimilitude, it makes sense in a way. The clenched fist is a symbol of defiance, of taking the power back for the people, and its symbolic resonance transcends any type of copyright or bureaucratic bullshit. The predicament of using this iconography puts David Cage and of course Quantic Dream on a knife edge in terms of telling a bespoke story stripped of any sort of metaphorical real life context and blurring this line between exploiting what is going on in the real world and commenting on this made up version of the real world.
What's my biggest pet peeve? Vagueness. Takes just as much time to be specific.
And this purity through ignorance, to take these themes and lazily drop them into the story, is instantly shattered when we still have incidents of police brutality, which in turn skyrockets a once floundering civil rights movement into public consciousness once again. The way the writers handled this whole theming of Detroit Become Human could be contributed to dancing too close to the fire. And once again, I'm not here to say that you cannot talk about very touchy subjects, but there is a way of handling these types of subjects. Like when I play Silent Hill 2, I'm not thinking about sunshine and roses. I am allowing myself to experience some pretty grim shit. In fact, some of my favourite experiences while playing video games is those stories where the punchline isn't where everything blows up or dies. Not saying that chainsawing aliens' heads off is not fun, because it very much is, but when I'm in the mood I like to be pushed in terms of my own moral compass. Especially when you've been playing games for so long, such as myself, where I want to be pushed out of my comfort zone. And back on subject, the rejection of metaphor and the use of civilly charged iconography is a poor attempt to comment on something that the writers have no idea what they are talking about. And this performative wokeness makes a mockery of the people who fight these injustices, and panders to people who think they are fighting the good fight, yet all they are doing is just for show. Remember Coney 2012? How many millions of people put their little banners up with the Coney 2012 thing on their social media pages? How many rallied on these said social media pages to protest against Coney to then not show up? And that's how David Cage and Quantic Dream's message when it comes to the oppression of this race of androids comes across. It's performative and ultimately means nothing. And ironically, what they should have done is gone all in and made those provocative takes, rather than lowball us with this meaningless pap. At least then we would know where DC and his team were going with this, rather than this insidious wishy-washy stance. If they love making big and bold statements in their action and visuals, why can't they do that in their story? Plus I can't shake off this feeling of this underlying greasy sleaze covering everything. It just feels cynical. If David Cage wants to be taken seriously in his mission of creating mature stories for an assumed mature audience, he has proven himself again and again and again that he cannot do it. And this posturing of being this galaxy brain creative genius and this profound storyteller is a complete fabrication. And the ego to say that he wants to change the game in interactive storytelling while producing low-rent shit like this makes him look like a dissociated schlub. And I know it's very easy to start calling him names and stuff like that, and I've done it a little bit throughout the series, but his lack of forward momentum in his statements makes him just look like a coward. However, I think it's the best time to step back and keep my own flawed perspective in check. You see, this mindset of analysing the messages of these stories that apparently have not been related to real life events might be excessive to the people who aren't aware of the real events that the creators clearly adapted to meet their own needs, or for people who don't care for the subtleties. And I bet that blue pill tastes so sweet. To remind everyone, the reason why this series of videos mutated from this casual riffing to these in-depth discussions is due to how David Cage and his conspirators use Olympic levels of mental gymnastics to say a lot without saying anything. Yes, I am aware I have already mentioned this before, but for this part of the video, it needs reiterating. If you stand for nothing, or your intent is unclear, then all you are doing in anything in life is wasting people's time. And I'm not saying that everything needs to have a message. When I play, say, Postal 2, I'm not thinking about the implication of my mindless slaughter, or the flagrant disregard for political correctness, because I am too occupied laughing like an idiot because the sandbox I am given allows me to express myself in any way I want. In a way, I am creating my own narrative. And while it may be crass, it is far more satisfying than this meticulously crafted, rigid cinematic experience. Furthermore, if we just accept what David Cage is trying to express at this face value, we are then allowing people who create this crap to do this again and again. When you buy this type of game, it just allows this type of quality to thrive. In the same vein as modern military shooters in the last decade and a half. If people stopped buying them, they would stop making them. So then when people complain about there's too many Call of Duty games, such as myself, and I buy a Call of Duty game, I've got no one else to blame but myself. And to quote Dan Olsen from the channel Folding Ideas,
"This is how you get Jarhead sequels. Do you want Jarhead sequels? Because this is how you get Jarhead sequels."
Love being a Marine. Hoorah!
I just want to tidy up your room a little. I only need 2 minutes. Is that okay, Alice? Alice in Wonderland. Of course.
Oh shit! I forgot about Alice! If you remember that I alluded to something about Kara and Alice early on in this video, well, throughout this journey, the big bastard who joins you on this pilgrimage to Canada, who is called Luther, attempts to tell Kara a secret about Alice that she doesn't want to know.
Kara, have you ever noticed anything about Alice? Kara, there's something I need to tell you. It's about Alice.
Not now, Luther.
Kara, there's something I have to tell you. It's about Alice.
We'll have lots of time to talk on the bus. I'll be back. Stay with Alice.
And this secret recontextualizes the entire relationship between Kara and Alice, and is apparently a big moment in the story. I'm just going to show you how this reveal happens.
Alice?
You knew from the beginning. You just didn't want to see it. She wanted a mom, and you wanted someone to care for. You needed each other. What difference does it make? Do you love her any less now that you know she's one of us? Alice loves you, Kara. She loves you more than anything in the world. She became the little girl you wanted, and you became the mother she needed. Forgetting who you are to become what someone needs you to be. Maybe that's what it means to be alive.
Now, question time. Are you moved by this, apart from laughing at it, by how awkward it is? This big reveal that Cage planted seeds throughout, this big character development, and all the stuff that happens before and after this reveal raises more questions than it answers. Such as, if Alice and Kara are both androids, and there is more than one that looks like them, how, as the player, haven't we seen more of these throughout the story? You would think that Kara would have bumped into a few of her twin sisters, right? Or seen more Alice's just lollygagging around. Also, this reveal changes the impact of the implied abuse that Alice had to endure from her piece of shit dad, and is easily the dumbest contradiction I have seen in a David Cage game.
Life's funny. I lost my job because of androids. Then when I need somebody to take care of this goddamn house, what do? I go out and hire a fucking android. What a joke. Of course, androids are so fucking wonderful. They never fail. They're never tired, never sad. They're so fucking perfect, they ruin my fucking life.
How can Todd complain about androids ruining his life when he should know that his own daughter is one? Was he that high out of his fucking mind not to notice? As we're at the stage of the video where I'm picking holes in the logic of a David Cage game, let's have some more fun. Another rapturous plot hole is where Marcus in a certain playthrough can acquire a bomb that will wipe out the entire city if their demands are not met. And yes, this has been used as a tactic in real life political coups, but in this game it dilutes the message, especially when the threat is everyone being turned into nuclear vapor. And the best part of this whole arc is that this explosion is told to you rather than shown. Also, there's another tidbit I'd like to mention which was very amusing in my eyes, where Connor can die throughout the story, but as he's an android and they've got thousands of copies of Connor, when he's rebuilt, Hank just freaks out every single time, and it's one of the best running gags in the game.
Jesus Christ.
My predecessor was unfortunately destroyed, but CyberLife transferred its memory and sent me to replace it.
You died in my arms. And now you're back here as if nothing happened. Fuck you.
And the last one I like to highlight is when Connor turns his back on the police and turns into John Wick. It's not specifically a plot hole, but it comes out of nowhere and I want more because it's fucking great. And that's not scratching the surface on how all three of our characters finally meet. Well, two of the said characters, because Kara's encounter with Marcus is so small it's meaningless. But after this moment, she acts like she met her god. She keeps making offhand comments about Marcus and stuff he did, even though they must have known each other for about 5 minutes. It's weird. And it's another obvious example of Kara being on the Z team in terms of the story. I could easily blow raspberries for the rest of this video, and it would be more meaningful than what she does throughout the whole story. And going back on the civil rights thing for just a little moment here, the cherry on top of this whole shit sundae is Kara's chat with a woman called Rose, who is a human helping androids escape the city to the Great White North. The problem is, you know what, I'm telling too much, just watch.
What are deviants doing in the snow with a little girl?
Her father was beating her. When I saw what was happening, something snapped inside of me. All of a sudden, I felt like her life was more important than mine. I had to protect her. So we ran away.
I understand.
Why are you helping us? Most humans hate androids.
My people were often made to feel their lives were worthless. Some survived, but only because they found others who helped them along the way.
Okay, on a surface level, this sounds like a profound moment, and I'm not going to take away the actors here, the performances are fantastic. But having a black woman explain what is going on is like, well, that underlying grease is bubbling through the cracks again, and it's, I feel like I need to take a shower. And it's David Cage having his provocative cake and trying to eat it. But once again, he has no subtlety, so this just comes off as just And this sums up my overall feelings towards the multiple endings too. And while most of it follows the same shades of grey that the rest of the story has, and is honestly pretty damn compelling, most of them are so dull it makes playing through the game almost meaningless. Like I said, Detroit, despite its flaws, is a decent journey with a lousy destination. And no, this isn't a joke on the expense of the Canucks.
A fucking leaf.
And call me twisted, I preferred the bad endings over the good ones because, alright, okay, all the endings left me with more questions than answers again, but for the sake of your attention span, I want to keep this part of the video tight and compact. Imprisoned, if you will. Oh man, that's a bad joke. One finale I want to talk about is when Kara gets captured and gets sent to what can only be described as an android concentration camp. Okay, it's called a recycling center, but yeah, big yikes. In this said camp, Kara is stripped of her identity and forced into a meat grinder, or a metal grinder, whatever. And if you let this thing play out, it's pretty fucking dark. But I will give Quantic their due again, because even when you think this ending is going to be one destination, no. All these endings have multiple variables, and even when it looks like it's going to be the end for Kara, it isn't. You can escape the camp and live as a fugitive, and most of these endings have that same sort of layer of change. You can just go the complete opposite, and that's a really cool idea. And yes, I won't deny that if you let this ending play out, it's pretty grim, but it's one of the few times where Detroit has any kind of eternal logic in its world. Until, and here comes the plot holes again, you realise that all these androids come from a single company, and this said company didn't make a kill switch to shut these things down if they got out of hand. You know, a power switch that is separate from their AI runtimes. Like, imagine that. You could have an ending of the game where all the androids drop dead when they shut off a central server. What I'm trying to say is, where's my Dark Age of Camelot ending, David Cage? While there's a broad variety of endings and it's the only excess apart from the graphics that actually makes sense to me, the ones I've experienced in my 5 playthroughs of Detroit Become Human and the ones I've watched in various compilations on YouTube all have this underbaked notion to them, and none of them left me wanting more. Just like Heavy Rain, just like Beyond, Detroit falls into the miasma of being a story that is stuffed full of interesting ideas, but none of them have any long-term payoff apart from their main threads, which, as you already know, are the Michael Bay explosions everywhere style shit. Sure, it's fun at first glance, and I won't lie, I had a blast in my first playthrough, but as there's so much white noise contained in Detroit Become Human, trying to recall what happened even minutes after the fact was a challenge. Actually, that was the biggest problem while making these videos. The amount of content that is thrown into your lap on a narrative level is almost suffocating. Even with my extensive notes and multiple terabytes of recorded game footage, I struggled to remember what happened during this story, with its overwhelming amount of concepts stuffed into a narrative that was already flush with multiple strands in the main plot, and these strands on their own would have been passable. If DC could just trim back on these ideas and bank them for future games, or make his games into an episodic format as I theorised earlier, maybe we might have a chance to make the smaller ideas pop out and make an impression. Because in this format, everything has been beaten down into this fine, bland paste. Taking Detroit as a whole is a pill that is borderline impossible to swallow, and it's another promising game sacrificed on the altar of feature creep and narrative bloat. And the statements inside may sound profound and deep, yet have nothing other to say except the words that fall out of their lips. In the end, all those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain. And that sums up my thoughts on Detroit. It's a deeply flawed game with a ton of upside that almost collapses under its own narrative weight, and it's dumb as hell. With that said, it's far more interesting and entertaining than Quantic's previous games. Yet it shares the same baggage as those previous titles, and while I don't care for David Cage and his supernatural incompetence with writing, his directorial work on the other hand is okay. His team knows how to make a stunning looking game, and there are shots and sequences that really stood out to me. It just hammers this point home. If we could put this technology in the right hands, we could see some cool cinematic moments that we have never seen before in gaming, and it just irks me that we have people here with all the gear but no idea. And I do get the impression that David Cage writes like he's in a permanent midlife crisis. And if I had a takeaway from all this stuff, is that I think I'm done with auteurs in any media. Yeah, I will celebrate individual expression. I mean, I make YouTube videos here. Would be awkward if I said the opposite. As it comes to the media I consume, a singular creator will never take precedent over a group. Sure, I will still play games from these said creators, but now they won't hold any extra meaning for me. To put it bluntly, fuck 'em. The bottom line here is Detroit Become Human is an onion of idiocy. While it may lead you to a tear, it has a higher chance to leave a bitter taste in your mouth. I can softly recommend it, but it's only for the people who have a high tolerance for jank, or have too many brain cells that they want to burn. And now that my job is done, yes, I know Omricon is another DC game and I'll get to it eventually, I am happy to say that I'm done with David Cage and his dramatic detritus.
Androids, everybody needs good androids. Androids should be...
We wanted to explore universal themes, Pet. Themes that have repeated themselves throughout societies, and one of those is the relationship between those who have power and those who do not have power.
Androids have feelings.
Oh man, it's so good to be playing normal games again. Oh, I'm so glad. It's been such a long road, and I never want to play a David Cage game again. Ah, this is nice. I'm bored.
You'll pay for this. How much will you steal from me before you're satisfied?